Hey guys, imagine stepping into a world where your most intimate desires could lead straight to a blood-soaked altar, where gods demand not just your prayers, but your pounding heart, literally ripped out while you're still alive. We're talking about the Aztecs, folks, where sex wasn't just fun and games, it was a twisted tango with death, divinity, and downright absurdity. Buckle up, because this isn't your grandma's history lesson. It's a nightmare wrapped in feathers and jade. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. The Aztecs, those magnificent builders of pyramids, masters of maze, and absolute champions of turning everyday life into a horror show. Picture this. It's the 15th century, and you're plopped down in the heart of Tenochtitlan, the floating city that's basically Venice on steroids, surrounded by lakes chinampas, those genius floating gardens, and enough human skulls to make a goth kid's dream come true. But we're not here for the architecture or the agriculture. Oh no. We're peeling back the layers of their society to expose the raw, throbbing underbelly of their sexual practices, the ones that make modern dating apps look like child's play. And trust me, if you think ghosting is bad, wait till you hear about getting your heart ghosted, permanently. Let's start with the basics, shall we? The Aztecs, or Mexica as they called themselves, weren't prudes by any stretch. Sex was woven into the fabric of their world, like threads in a colorful mantle. But here's the ironic twist. In a culture obsessed with fertility gods and ritual bloodletting, getting frisky outside the rules could land you in a world of pain that makes a bad breakup feel like a spa day. Survival back then? It was a daily grind of appeasing gods who were as moody as teenagers and twice as bloodthirsty. You'd wake up thinking, will today be the day I farm some corn, or the day I end up as cosmic chow? And sex? Oh, it was right there in the mix, a double-edged obsidian blade of pleasure and peril. First off, meet the divine squad responsible for all this steamy chaos. At the top of the pantheon for bedroom matters is Xochiquetzal, the goddess of flowers, love, beauty, and, get this, non-procreative sex. Yeah, she was the patroness of getting it on just for kicks, protector of young mothers, and basically the Aztec equivalent of a love coach with a floral crown. But don't let the pretty name fool you. Her rituals involved dances, feasts, and sometimes a side of sacrifice that'd make your eyes water. Then there's her male counterpart, Xochipilli, the flower prince, god of art, games, homosexuality, wait for the irony there, and hallucinogenic plants. He'd oversee the fun stuff, music, dancing, and those wild nights fueled by sacred mushrooms. Sounds like a party god, right? Wrong. In Aztec land, even parties could end with someone losing their skin, literally. And let's not forget Tlazolteotl, the filth eater. This lady was the goddess of vice, purification, sexuality, and fertility. She inspired lust, forgave sexual sins, but only if you confessed, often to a priest right before death. Imagine spilling your dirtiest secrets on your deathbed, only for her to eat your sins by, well, let's just say the confession involved some ritualistic flair that wasn't exactly confidential. The absurdity? These gods demanded balance, indulge, but pay the price. Too much fun, and bam, you're volunteering for the altar to keep the sun rising. Because folks, in Aztec cosmology, the universe was a fragile beast that needed constant feeding. Blood was the currency, and sex? It was the spark that often lit the sacrificial fire. Now, picture daily life for your average Aztec Joe or Jane. Society was stratified like a pyramid, emperor at the top, nobles, priests, warriors, merchants, farmers, and slaves at the bottom. Marriage was a big deal, arranged often in childhood, with ceremonies that involved tying cloaks together, cute, right, and sharing a meal of tamales. But premarital hanky-panky? Forbidden, like death forbidden. If you got caught fooling around before the knot was tied, you could be stoned, strangled, or thrown into a fire. Survival tip number 1, keep it in your loincloth until the elders say go. And adultery? Oh boy, if a noble cheated, heads rolled, literally. Commoners might get away with a beating or divorce, but the elite? Public execution, often with the lover dragged through the streets like yesterday's trash. But here's where the historical absurdity kicks in. Polygamy was cool for the upper crust. Emperors like Montezuma II had harems of hundreds, yes, hundreds of wives and concubines. These women weren't just eye candy. They wove textiles, managed households, and popped out heirs like it was an Olympic sport. The pain of survival? Imagine being a concubine in a palace where jealousy brewed like pulque, that fermented agave drink. One wrong glance, and you could be accused of sorcery or infidelity, leading to a quick trip to the sacrificial stone. And the emperor? He'd honor his favorites with gifts, but the pressure to produce sons was immense. No heirs? Time to find a new bedmate, or worse, offer one up to the gods for better luck. Speaking of which, let's dip our toes into the sacred prostitution pool. Enter the Ahuyanime, the joy girls linked to S3xual. These weren't your street corner workers. They were temple-affiliated, often seen as semi-divine conduits for pleasure. They'd dance at festivals, adorned in feathers and flowers, offering services to warriors or nobles as a form of ritual. The irony? In a society that crucified, metaphorically, everyday sex outside marriage, these women were protected by the gods. But don't romanticize it. Their lives were tied to the temple's whims, and aging out meant poverty or worse. Comment below. Would you trade modern dating for a shot at being an Ahuyanime? Sounds glamorous until the sacrifices start. Now, brace yourselves because we're venturing into the darker corners, the punishments that make you question if the Aztecs invented horror movies. Homosexuality? Taboo with a capital T. Despite Xochipilli being associated with it in some myths, society viewed it as a cosmic imbalance. The active partner in male-male relations got disemboweled, yanked out through the rear, folks. The passive, emasculated and left to bleed. Lesbians fared no better, stoning or strangling. The absurdity is palpable. A culture with gods of love and fertility, yet enforcing heteronormativity with barbaric zeal. Why? To maintain social order, they said. But really, it was about control. Priests dictating who beds whom to keep the gods happy and the empire running. And masturbation? Ha! Caught in the act, you'd face public humiliation. Thorns pierced through sensitive spots, or worse, exile. Kids were taught early. Self-pleasure angers the gods, leads to weakness. Survival meant suppressing urges, channeling them into approved outlets like marriage or war. Warriors, those buff jaguar knights, abstained before battles for strength, piercing their members with spines for blood offerings. Pain as purification. Talk about a buzzkill. Let's zoom in on a typical festival to really feel the vibe. Take the Oshpanisli, the sweeping of the roads month, dedicated to Tlazolteotl and mother goddesses. It started innocent, cleaning temples, fasting. But then, a woman impersonating the goddess danced for days, adorned in finery, only to be decapitated at the end. Her blood swept to fertilize the earth. Sexual undertones? Absolutely. Fertility rites often mimicked intercourse with phallic symbols and ritual unions before the kill. The crowd watched, mesmerized as life force mingled with divine ecstasy. Horrifying. You bet. But to them, it was necessary absurdity. Die beautifully to live eternally. Or consider the Tlacoxepehualistli, flaying of men, for Zipitotec, the flayed lord of spring and renewal. Captives fought gladiators, then got skinned alive. Priests wore the skins for days, dancing in a macabre second skin that rotted off. Sexual link? The flaying symbolized rebirth, like shedding old desires for new growth. But imagine the screams, the smell, pure nightmare fuel. And guess what? Some victims were married to priestesses beforehand, a mock union ending in death. Romance, Aztec style. Till death do us part, accelerated. The pain of survival hits hard here. Common folk toiled in fields, paying tribute in goods or blood. Women ground corn endlessly, bore children in agony, no epidurals, and risked sacrifice if crops failed. Men hunted, fought, and offered auto-sacrifice, pricking genitals with maguey thorns to drip blood for the gods. Why genitals? Symbol of life force, fertility. Ironic, isn't it? Hurt where it creates to sustain creation. Comment if this makes you squirm. What modern sacrifice compares? As we delve deeper, think about the kids. Aztec education was tough love. Boys learned warfare, girls weaving and cooking, but sex ed, implicit through myths, stories of gods like Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror who tempted with lust only to punish. One tale, he tricks Quetzalcoatl into incest with his sister. Boom, downfall. Moral, desire destroys if unchecked. Teens fasted, abstained, prepared for adulthood's rigid roles. Slip up, family honor stained, punishment swift. Now, aphrodisiacs, because even in horror there's hedonism. Aztecs chowed on peanuts, chocolate, so colloidal, bitter and spicy, hallucinogenic mushrooms, even insect larvae for that extra kick. Nobles hosted feasts where pulque flowed, leading to, well, controlled chaos. But overindulge? Tlazolteotl might forgive, but society wouldn't. Confessions to priests involved detailing every sin, then penance, fasting, bloodletting. Absurd therapy session. I lusted after my neighbor, now poke my tongue. Let's humanize this with a hypothetical day in the life. You're Itzcoatl, a merchant. You rise at dawn, pray to Huitzilopochtli, the war god. Breakfast, maize tortillas. Work, trade, jade, feathers. But eyes wander to a beautiful weaver. Temptation, remember the rules, no affairs. Evening, family meal, stories of gods. Bedtime, with wife, procreate dutifully. Dream of festivals where desire dances with danger. But festivals weren't all fun. The new fire ceremony every 52 years. Bundled years died, world might end. Priests abstained sexually for months, then sacrificed a victim on a volcano, lighting a fire in his chest. Sexual restraint built tension, release in ritual violence. Survival's edge, one wrong move, apocalypse. And women, often overlooked, but powerhouses. Noble women advised, priestesses led rites. But in sacrifice, they embodied goddesses. Dance, seduced crowds, then died. One ritual. A girl as Chalcutlicu, water goddess, married 4 boys before all sacrificed. Mock wedding, real death, heartbreaking absurdity. As part 1 wraps, we've got more horrors ahead. Ponder. In this world of jade masks and bloody altars, sex was life's spark, yet snuffed for cosmic balance. Ironic, eh? Gods gave desire, then demanded payment in pain. What do you think? Could you navigate Aztec love? Drop a comment with your survival strategy. Stay tuned for part 2, deeper into ritual horrors. Alright folks, we're back in the blood-soaked, feather-adorned madness of the Aztec world, where love and lust could get you a one-way ticket to the sacrificial altar faster than you can say obsidian blade. If you thought part 1 was a wild ride, brace yourselves. The second act dives deeper into the horrifying absurdity of Aztec sexual practices, where every kiss could be a prelude to catastrophe. Picture yourself in Tenochtitlan, surrounded by towering pyramids, the stench of blood, and a culture so obsessed with pleasing the gods that even your bedroom antics were under divine scrutiny. Ready to feel the pain of survival in a world where passion and punishment were 2 sides of the same jaguar pelt? Let's jump in. We left off with the gods, Xochiquetzal, Xochipilli, Tlazolteotl, those divine troublemakers who made sex a sacred minefield. Now, let's zoom in on the rituals that turned desire into a cosmic PowerPoint presentation for the gods. The Aztecs didn't just have sex, they performed it, ritualized it, and sometimes sacrificed it to keep the universe spinning. One wrong move, and you're not just grounded, you're ground into the next life. Let's start with the festival of Toxcatl, dedicated to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, trickster god of fate, sorcery, and, yup, temptation. This guy was the ultimate wingman and executioner rolled into one. Toxcatl was the Super Bowl of Aztec festivals, a month-long party that made Coachella look like a church picnic. The star? A young man chosen as Tezcatlipoca's Ixiptla, his living embodiment. This guy wasn't just any Joe. He was the hottest, fittest, most charismatic dude in town. For a year, he lived like an emperor. Fed the best tamales, draped in gold and quetzal feathers, taught to play flutes, and, here's the kicker, given 4 wives to entertain him. Sounds like a dream, right? Wrong. These women were priestesses, their unions ritualistic, meant to channel divine fertility. Every night was a sacred performance, not a honeymoon, in the grand finale. At the festival's peak, this poor stud climbed the pyramid, broke his flutes, symbolic, ouch, and had his heart ripped out while still beating. The wives? They mourned, then moved on to the next year's model. Survival tip: if the priests start calling you perfect, run. The irony here is thicker than pulque. The Aztecs celebrated life's pleasures, sex, music, flowers, but always with a guillotine hanging overhead. Why? Because Tezcatlipoca loved chaos. His myths paint him as a seducer who'd tempt you into bed, then ruin your life. One story has him luring Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, into a drunken fling with his sister, leading to exile. Moral? Lust leads to downfall. The festival embodied this. Indulge the Ixiptla, make him a god of desire, then kill him to remind everyone. Pleasure's temporary, death's eternal. Drop a comment. Could you handle a year of luxury knowing it ends in sacrifice? Now, let's talk about the women in these rituals, because they weren't just sidekicks, they were central to the horror show. Take the festival of Huitequilhuitl, honoring Xilonen, goddess of young corn. A young woman, often a captive or slave, was chosen as Xilonen's stand-in. She danced, sang, and was treated like royalty, adorned in maize-colored robes. Men flirted, offered gifts, and the vibe was electric, until the priests decided it was time for her to join the goddess. Decapitation, heart extraction, sometimes flaying. Her blood was sprinkled on crops to ensure a good harvest. Sexual undertones? You bet. The dances mimicked courtship, her beauty a symbol of fertile earth. But the pain of survival for her? Non-existent. She didn't survive. The absurdity? This was framed as an honor, her death a gift to the community. Meanwhile, her family, if she had one, watched in terror, knowing resistance meant joining her. This brings us to a grim reality. Aztec women often bore the brunt of these sexual sacrificial rituals. While men could climb the social ladder through war or trade, women's paths were narrower: marriage, motherhood, or priesthood. And priesthood wasn't the serene nun life you're picturing. Priestesses of Xochiquetzal or Tlazolteotl led rituals that blurred the line between sacred and scandalous. They'd fast, pierce their tongues or ears for blood offerings, and sometimes unite with warriors or nobles in symbolic acts to channel divine energy. But here's the catch. These women were often chosen young, trained to suppress personal desires for divine duty. Slip up, say, fall in love outside the temple, and you're facing exile or worse. The irony? A culture worshipping fertility gods kept women's sexuality on a tight leash unless it served the gods or state. Let's pivot to the warriors, because their sexual lives were a masterclass in masochistic devotion. Aztec warriors, jaguar knights, eagle warriors, were the rock stars of their day, strutting in animal pelts, wielding macuilhuitl clubs studded with obsidian. But their sex lives, strictly regulated. Before battle, abstinence was mandatory. Why? To preserve vital energy for combat. Priests preached that ejaculation weakened you, so warriors channeled that energy into war, or bloodletting. Picture this. A warrior, pumped for battle, pierces his tongue, ears, or, genitals with magi spines, offering blood to Huitzilopochtli, the war god. Why the privates? Because that's where life force flowed, and the gods were greedy for it. The pain was excruciating, but the reward? Divine favor, maybe a promotion. The absurdity? You're mutilating your manhood to prove your manliness. Comment below. Would you endure this for glory? And let's not gloss over the battlefield sexual horrors. Captives weren't just killed, they were often humiliated first. Some rituals involved stripping prisoners, forcing mock unions with priestesses or effigies before sacrifice. The point? To degrade, to break their spirit before offering their heart to the gods. For the Aztecs, sex wasn't just personal, it was political, a tool to dominate enemies and reinforce hierarchy. Imagine being a captive, paraded naked through Tenochtitlan streets, knowing your fate. Survival? Not an option. Your only hope was a quick death, but the Aztecs loved their theatrics. Now, let's get weird with aphrodisiacs and hallucinogens, because the Aztecs didn't mess around when it came to spicing things up. Beyond chocolate and pulque, they used teonanacatl, sacred mushrooms, to induce visions during rituals. Nobles and priests would trip out, seeing gods, ancestors, or cosmic truths, often in orgiastic settings. These weren't raves, they were controlled chaos, with priests overseeing every move. Sex during these rituals was symbolic, meant to merge human and divine. But overstep, say hook up without permission, and you're confessing to S3xual, fasting for weeks or worse, bleeding for forgiveness. The irony? A drug-fueled vision of ecstasy could end in a very sober punishment. Speaking of punishments, let's revisit the everyday folks, because the nobles weren't the only ones under pressure. Commoners, farmers, weavers, fishermen lived by strict codes. Adultery for them meant public shaming, head shaving, or a beating. But the real horror was for the kids. Aztec parents drilled chastity into their children like it was a military campaign. Boys and girls were segregated in Calmecacs, elite schools, or Telpochcales, commoner schools, taught to fear desire. One myth told of a boy who lusted after a girl and was turned into a scorpion by Tezcatlipoca. Ouch! The message? Keep it pure, or the gods will sting you. Teens caught sneaking a kiss faced whipping or thorn piercing. Survival meant obedience, no matter how much your heart raced. Let's paint a scene to feel the vibe. You're Citlali, a weaver's daughter. Dawn breaks over Tenochtitlan's canals. You grind maize, your hands aching, while your mother whispers about the upcoming festival of Atlcahualo, where children are sacrificed to Tlaloc, the rain god. You're 15, betrothed to a merchant son, but you've got a crush on a warrior. Bad idea. If you're caught flirting, it's public humiliation, paraded with your hair cut, thorns in your ears. You attend the festival, watching a child dressed as Tlaloc's bride dance, tears streaming before her heart's offered. Sex isn't mentioned, but the subtext is clear. Life and death are lovers, and you're caught in their dance. You go home, pray to Xochiquetzal for strength, and hope your betrothed isn't a jerk. And speaking of kids, child sacrifice adds another layer of horror to this sexual tapestry. During Atlcahualo, children, often orphans or captives, were dressed as gods, sometimes married in mock ceremonies to symbolize cosmic unions. Their tears were seen as rain, pleasing Tlaloc. The sexual element? Subtle, but there. Fertility of earth tied to human life. Parents watched, powerless, as their kids were taken. The pain of survival? Knowing your child could be next if the rains didn't come. Absurd, right? You're praying for crops while crying for your kid. Let's touch on the marketplace, because even commerce had a sexy, sinister edge. Merchants sold aphrodisiacs, cacao, damiana leaves, even ground bones. Yikes. But they also traded slaves, some destined for sacrifice or temple service. Women slaves, especially beautiful ones, might become concubines or ahuyanime, their bodies a currency for power or piety. The irony? A slave could live better than a free commoner, until the priests needed a body for the altar. Survival meant navigating this brutal economy, where desire was a commodity. As we close part 2, reflect on this. The Aztecs wove sex into their cosmic drama, but every act came with a warning label. Indulge, and you might pay with your life. The gods gave pleasure, but demanded pain. What's your take? Could you survive this world of divine hookups and deadly breakups? Comment with your thoughts, and tell me what time it is where you are. Part 3's coming, and it's gonna get even bloodier. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the twisted, blood-drenched world of the Aztecs, where every heartbeat could be your last and every romantic encounter carried the weight of divine judgment. If you thought the last 2 parts were a roller coaster of horror and irony, strap in. This third act cranks the dial to 11, plunging us into the darkest corners of Aztec sexual practices. Picture Tenochtitlan at its peak, canals shimmering under moonlight, pyramids looming like silent judges, and a society where sex was both a sacred gift and a one-way ticket to the underworld. We're peeling back the curtain on rituals, punishments, and cosmic absurdity that make modern scandals look like a toddler's tantrum. Ready to feel the sting of survival in a world where love could literally cost you your heart? Let's dive in. We've already met the gods, Xochiquetzal, Tlazolteotl, Tezcatlipoca, and their knack for turning desire into a deadly game. Now, let's explore the rituals that made sex a public spectacle, where the line between ecstasy and execution was thinner than a maize husk. Take the festival of Panquetzalistli, honoring Huitzilopochtli, the war god who kept the sun burning. This wasn't just a parade, it was a blood-soaked extravaganza. Warriors, fresh from battle, offered captives to the altar, but the build-up included ritual dances where men and women, often temple devotees, performed suggestive moves symbolizing cosmic union. The crowd cheered, priests chanted, and the air thrummed with tension. Then came the main event. Hearts ripped out, bodies rolled down pyramids. The sexual subtext? These dances mimicked creation myths, where gods coupled to birth the world. But the irony? You're dancing to celebrate life, only to end it in a spray of blood. Survival tip. If you're picked to dance, practice your moves and your prayers. Let's zoom in on the role of captives because their fate ties sex and sacrifice in a gruesome knot. Captives weren't just prisoners, they were cosmic pawns. During festivals like Tlacaxepehualistli, the flaying of men, some were dressed as gods, given temporary wives, often priestesses for ritual unions. These weren't love matches, they were symbolic acts to appease Xipe-Totec, the flayed god of renewal. The captive married his goddess, maybe even believed he was divine for a moment, only to be skinned alive days later, his hide worn by priests in a grotesque parade. The sexual act? A fleeting honor before the ultimate dishonor. Imagine the psychological whiplash. One day you're a god stand-in, bedding a sacred bride, the next you're a human piñata. The pain of survival? For captives, it was a cruel mirage. Pleasure dangled, then snatched away. Now, let's talk about the women who navigated this nightmare. Aztec women, from nobles to slaves, walked a tightrope of duty and danger. Take the Xihuatlamacaxqui, female priests dedicated to goddesses like Xihuacoatl, the serpent woman tied to childbirth and war. These women led rituals, sang hymns, and sometimes performed unions with male priests to symbolize divine fertility. But here's the kicker, their chastity outside these rites was non-negotiable. Fall for a charming warrior, you're risking stoning or worse. The absurdity? A culture obsessed with fertility demanded women suppress their own desires unless the gods greenlit it. And childbirth? A battlefield. Women who died giving birth were honored like warriors, their souls escorting the sun. But survive? You're back to grinding maize, praying your kid isn't chosen for Tleloc's next rain ritual. Comment below, could you handle the pressure of being an Aztec woman? Speaking of pressure, let's pivot to the men, specifically the nobles. These guys had it all. Wealth, power, multiple wives. But with great privilege came great peril. Nobles were expected to set the moral standard, so any sexual misstep, like an affair with a commoner, was a public scandal. Punishment? Public execution, often by crushing with stones. The irony? While emperors like Ahuitzotl juggled harems, a noble caught with a merchant's wife could lose his head. Literally. And let's not forget the auto-sacrifice. Nobles, like warriors, pierced their bodies, tongues, ears, genitals, with thorns or stingray spines to offer blood. Why the genitals again? Life force, baby. The gods love that stuff. Imagine the pain. You're a high roller, draped in jade, but you're stabbing your privates to prove your piety. Survival meant enduring agony for status. Now, let's get into the marketplace, because even trade was laced with sexual undertones. Markets in Tenochtitlan were vibrant. Think Black Friday with more feathers. Vendors sold cacao for aphrodisiac drinks, maguey sap for pulque, and herbs like damiana to spark desire. But they also traded people. Slaves, often war captives or debtors, could be bought for labor, concubinage, or sacrifice. Beautiful women fetched high prices, destined for noble households or temples as awiyaname, the joy girls. Their lives, a mix of privilege and peril. They might dine with nobles, wear fine clothes, but their bodies belong to the gods or their masters. One wrong move, displease a priest, fail to please a client, and you're on the altar. The absurdity? A slave could outshine a free woman in status, only to die for a bad harvest. Survival meant playing a deadly game of charm and compliance. Let's paint a scene to feel the pulse of this world. You're S3xual, a young noble woman. Dawn breaks, and you're weaving cotton, your fingers raw. Your husband, a warrior, is off campaigning, leaving you to manage the household. Rumors swirl of an upcoming festival, Quechole, for Mixcoatl, the hunting god. You're summoned to the temple to dance as a deer, symbolizing prey for the hunt. The dance is sensual, your movements mimicking a doe's grace, but the priests watch like hawks. One misstep, One overly flirty glance, and you're accused of impropriety. Your heart races. You know the penalty for dishonor is death. You perform perfectly, return home, and pray your husband comes back alive. But at night, you hear the screams from the pyramid, a captive sacrifice, sex and death forever entwined. You whisper to S3xual for protection, wondering if you'll ever feel safe. And let's not forget the kids, because Aztec childhood was no picnic. Boys and girls were drilled in discipline from birth. By the age of 10, boys were drilled for battle or destined for the priesthood, while girls were expected to master weaving and household duties. Public whipping. The irony? Kids were taught to revere fertility gods but fear their own bodies. Some were even betrothed as toddlers, their futures sealed before they could spell maize. The pain of survival? Growing up knowing one wrong crush could cost your life. Comment, what's the craziest rule you've ever followed for love? Now, let's talk hallucinogens, because the Aztecs took tripping to a whole new level. During rituals, priests and nobles consumed peyote, a morning glory seeds, or ololukui, to commune with gods. These weren't party drugs. They were sacred, often tied to sexual rites. Picture a temple ceremony. Torches flicker, drums pound, and a priestess, high on mushrooms, dances as Tlazolteotl, embodying lust and purification. Nobles join, their visions blurring human and divine. Sex might happen, symbolic of course, but it's under priestly supervision. Step out of line? You're confessing every detail to Tlazolteotl's priest, then fasting or bleeding for forgiveness. The absurdity? You're chasing divine ecstasy, but one wrong move lands you in mortal agony. And punishments? Oh, they got creative. Beyond stoning or strangling, some sexual crimes earned you a trip to the Quoticale, a stone vessel where your heart was offered to the gods. Adulterers, especially nobles, faced public trials where their sins were aired like a reality show. The crowd jeered, the priests judged, and the executioner sharpened his blade. Commoners might escape with a beating, but the shame lingered. Your family ostracized, your name mud. The irony. A society that celebrated fertility gods was obsessed with policing desire, all to keep the cosmic gears turning. Let's touch on the cosmic stakes, because the Aztecs believed sex wasn't just personal, it was universal. Their creation myths tied human desire to the gods' own dramas. Take the story of the fifth sun, the current world. The gods sacrificed themselves to start the sun's journey, but it demanded constant fuel, human blood. Sex, as the spark of life, was sacred, but only if it served this cycle. Stray too far, say indulge in forbidden love, and you're disrupting the cosmos. Punishment wasn't just personal, it was existential. The pain of survival? Knowing your fling could doom the world. As we wrap part 3, reflect on this. The Aztecs made sex a sacred art, but every brushstroke carried a death sentence. Desire was a gift from the gods, but they charged a bloody price. What's your take? Could you dance the line between passion and peril? Drop a comment with your thoughts and tell me what you'd sacrifice for love in this world. Part 4 is coming, and it's the grand finale of horror. Stay tuned. Here we are, folks, at the grand, gory finale of our dive into the Aztecs' most horrifying sexual practices. A world where love, lust, and sacrifice tangled in a dance macabre enough to make your skin crawl. If you've survived parts 1 through 3, you're tougher than a jaguar knight facing 1,000 enemies. Tenochtitlan's canals glisten, its pyramids cast long shadows, and the air hums with the chants of priests who see every heartbeat as a potential offering. This final act pulls no punches, diving into the rituals, myths, and daily terrors that made sex a cosmic gamble. Ready to feel the full weight of surviving in a society where desire could land you on an altar, your heart still beating as it's offered to the gods. Let's finish this nightmare with a flourish. We've danced with S3xual's flowers, shuddered at Tlazolteotl's sin-eating, and dodged Tezcatlipoca's tricks. Now, let's spotlight a ritual that ties sex and sacrifice into a knot so tight it chokes, the festival of Xochitl, honoring Huehueteotl, the old fire god. Picture this, a towering pole slick with sap, topped with a dough effigy of the god. Young men and women decked in feathers and body paint, climb it in a frenzied contest, their movements dripping with sexual symbolism, reaching for the fruit of life. The winner? honored, showered with gifts, maybe even a night with a temple priestess to seal the fertility rite. The loser, not always so lucky. Some years, the defeated were gifted to the gods, their hearts fueling the fire that kept the cosmos warm. The irony, you're climbing for glory, but one slip, literal or metaphorical, could mean your chest gets cracked open. Survival tip, work on your grip and maybe skip the pole climbing contest. Let's zoom in on the mythology that fueled this madness, because the Aztecs' stories were as wild as their rituals. Take the tale of S3xual and Piltzintecutli, a divine couple whose love birthed the first flowers. Sounds romantic, right? Except their union was orchestrated by the gods to stabilize the cosmos, and any mortal mimicking their passion without permission was asking for trouble. Another myth, Tezcatlipoca seduces Xochiquetzal, steals her from her husband, and sparks a divine soap opera that ends in chaos. The lesson? Desire is divine, but humans better stick to the script. These stories weren't just bedtime tales, they were warnings, drilled into kids and adults alike. Step out of line, and you're not just sinning, you're tempting the end of the world. Comment below, what's the wildest myth you've heard that shaped a culture's rules? Now let's talk about the priests, because these guys were the ultimate gatekeepers of Aztec sex lives. Priests didn't just lead sacrifices, they policed morality. If you confessed to Tlazolteotl, say about a steamy affair, you bared your soul to a priest who might forgive you, or mark you for punishment. These confessions weren't private, they were public spectacles, especially for nobles. Imagine spilling your deepest secrets to a stone-faced priest, knowing the crowd outside might hear. The penance? Days of fasting, bloodletting from your tongue or, genitals, or even exile to a frontier war zone. The absurdity? Priests themselves weren't always chaste. Some led rituals involving symbolic unions with priestesses, yet they'd condemn you for a stolen kiss. Survival meant knowing which priest to bribe with cacao beans and which to avoid like a jaguar in heat. And speaking of survival, let's focus on the commoners, because their lives were a grind of fear and duty. Picture a farmer, call him Tlaloc, toiling in the chinampas, his hands caked with mud. His wife, pregnant again, prays to S3xual for a safe delivery, knowing childbirth could make her a warrior in death, or leave her raising another kid who might be chosen for sacrifice. Sex for them was practical, make babies, keep the family going. But the rules were suffocating. Sneak a fling with the neighbor? If caught, you're dragged to the marketplace, your hair shaved, your body whipped with nettles. The kids watch, learning early that desire is dangerous. The pain? Living in a society where every act of intimacy was a potential crime, every child a potential offering. The irony? You're told to multiply, but one wrong move, and you're multiplying the gods' blood supply. Let's paint a final scene to bring this home. You're Cuauhtemoc, a young warrior, not yet a jaguar knight, but dreaming of glory. It's the festival of Tititl, honoring Illimatecutli, the old goddess of fertility and death. You're chosen to dance, your body painted black, your movements mimicking a lover's embrace with a priestess dressed as the goddess. The crowd roars, the drums pound, and for a moment you feel divine. But as the dance ends, you see the altar, slick with blood from the last sacrifice. Your heart skips. Will you be next? You survive the night, return to your wife, and make love under the stars, whispering prayers to Xochipilli for protection. But sleep doesn't come easy. Tomorrow's another day, another chance to anger the gods. The pain of survival? Knowing every moment of joy is borrowed time. And what about the kids in this world? We've touched on their strict upbringing, but let's dig deeper. Aztec children were pawns in a cosmic chess game. Some were dedicated to temples at birth, raised to be priests or priestesses, their lives bound to chastity or ritual sex. Others faced betrothals as young as 5, their parents haggling over dowries of cloth and maize. Sexual education? Myths and fear. A girl might hear of Coyolxauhqui, the moon goddess dismembered for rebellion, and learn to keep her desires in check. A boy might be told of Huehuecoyotl, the coyote god of mischief and lust, who tricks lovers into ruin, caught exploring their bodies, thorns through the lips or ears. The irony. A culture obsessed with fertility treated its youth like ticking time bombs, ready to explode the social order. Survival meant growing up fast, loving slow. Now, let's talk about the endgame, death. Because in Aztec culture, sex and death were lovers who never broke up. Every festival, every ritual circled back to sacrifice. Take the new fire ceremony, held every 52 years to renew the world. Priests abstained for months, channeling sexual energy into prayer. Then, on a volcano's peak, a victim, often a young man, was married to the fire god in a symbolic rite. His heart cut out, a fire lit in his chest. The sexual metaphor? Creation through destruction. The horror? Knowing your abstinence, your devotion, might still end in blood. The absurdity? The gods gave you desire to create life, then demanded life to keep the cosmos running. And let's not forget the economy of sex. Markets weren't just for maize and feathers. They were where bodies were bought and sold. Slaves, especially women, were commodities. A beautiful captive might become a concubine, her children legitimized if she pleased her master. But displease him? She's back on the market or headed for the altar. The Ahui anime, those temple joy girls, walked a similar line. They served nobles, warriors, even gods, but their lives were precarious. One bad festival, one displeased priest, and their sacrifice to appease a drought. The irony? Their beauty was power, until it wasn't. Survival meant playing the game, knowing the rules could change mid-move. As we close this saga, let's reflect on the big picture. The Aztecs wove sex into their cosmic tapestry, but every thread was soaked in blood. Desire was a divine spark, but the gods were arsonists, ready to burn you for straying. From the emperor's harem to the farmer's hut, every act of love was a gamble with death. The pain of survival? Living in a world where joy was a trap, where every kiss could be your last. The absurdity? Worshipping gods of fertility while fearing the very urges they inspired. So, what's the takeaway? The Aztecs remind us that human desire is universal, but its rules are cultural, and theirs were written in blood. Could you navigate this world of sacred hookups and deadly breakups? Drop a comment with your survival strategy, and tell me what time it is where you are. Thanks for joining me on this wild, horrifying ride through Aztec history. If you loved it, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's keep exploring the past's darkest corners together. Until next time, stay safe, and maybe keep your heart where the priests can't find it. If you loved it, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's keep exploring the past's darkest corners together. Until next time, stay safe, and maybe keep your heart where the priests can't find it. Imagine flickering torchlight dancing on jagged cave walls, revealing not just bison and mammoths, but ancient humans locked in eternal embraces, phalluses etched like defiant graffiti, and voluptuous figures that scream fertility in the face of ice. Age doom. This isn't your sanitized history book. It's the hidden erotica of prehistoric cave paintings, where our ancestors turned survival's grim grind into a sarcastic symphony of sex and stone. Ah, the Paleolithic era, those golden days when life was a non-stop party of dodging saber-toothed tigers, scraping together meals from berries and bones, and huddling in caves that smelled like wet fur and desperation. Picture it. You're a Cro-Magnon wrapped in animal hides that itch like hell, your belly rumbling from yesterday's failed hunt, and yet, somehow, you find the time to grab a flint tool and scratch out images that would make modern censors blush. Why? Because in the absurdity of prehistoric survival, sex wasn't just a pastime, it was a lifeline, a cosmic joke played by evolution to keep the species going amid blizzards, famines, and the constant whisper of death. We're talking about art that's hidden not just in caves, but in the shadows of history, where scholars hem and haw about fertility symbols while ignoring the obvious. Our forebears were horny survivors, immortalizing their urges on rock like the ultimate caveman diary. Let's start our sardonic stroll through this nightmare of the past with the Venus figurines, those plump, curvaceous carvings that pop up across Europe and Asia like ancient pinups. Take the Venus of Willendorf, unearthed in Austria and dating back around 30,000 years. She's a tiny limestone bombshell, no taller than your palm, with breasts like overripe melons, a belly that screams "I've survived famines," and hips wide enough to birth a whole tribe. No face, mind you, just a braided hairstyle or maybe a hat because priorities. Historians love calling her a fertility goddess, but let's be real. In a world where half your kids didn't make it past infancy, this was erotica wrapped in survival's pain. Imagine carving her by firelight, your fingers numb from the cold, dreaming of warmth and reproduction while wolves howl outside. The absurdity? She's got no arms or feet, because who needs those when you're symbolizing the eternal struggle to bang and breed against all odds? But Venus isn't alone in her ironic glory. Venture into the caves of France, like La Marche in the Vienne region, where engravings from 15,000 years ago reveal a veritable gallery of human figures, some with exaggerated phalluses that look like they could double as spears. Here, stick figure men strut with erections pointed skyward, women depicted with vulvas etched in precise, almost mocking detail. Survival's pain hits hard. These artists lived in a time when a bad winter meant starvation, yet they paused their hunt to doodle dongs on the wall. Was it ritual? Magic to ensure good hunting or bountiful births? Or just a way to cope with the horror of existence? A sarcastic, "take that death" scribbled in stone? Comment below. If you were a cave dweller, what would you etch first? An animal for food or a sexy symbol for hope? Now, let's trek to S3xual Crags in England, a limestone gorge riddled with caves that hid their secrets until 2003. Here, amid Ice Age art of bison and birds, archaeologists found stylized vulvas, triangular shapes with lines that scream female genitalia, carved over 12,000 years ago. The irony is delicious. These wounded man symbols, yeah, that's what some call them, but come on, might have been part of shamanic rites, where sex and spirituality blurred in the flickering dark. Picture the scene. A group of hunters battered by the elements, gathering in the cave's damp embrace to invoke fertility gods. The pain? Survival meant constant migration, fighting off predators and bearing loved ones too young. Yet, they chose to celebrate the erotic core of life, etching vulvas as talismans against extinction. It's historical absurdity at its finest, turning the most intimate parts into public art, all while the glacier creeps closer. Cross the pond, or rather the ancient land bridges, to the Serra de Capivara in Brazil, where rock shelters burst with paintings from 25,000 years ago. These aren't your European animal parades. Here, human figures dance in orgiastic frenzy, phallus is prominent, bodies intertwined in what looks like prehistoric parties. But hidden erotica? Oh yes, some images show explicit copulation, concealed in the narrative of hunts and rituals. The paper on concealment in art history points out how these are often overlooked in textbooks, perhaps censored by modern morals. Imagine the artists, nomadic gatherers in a lush but lethal landscape, snakes and jaguars lurking, painting their desires on rock as a defiant act against nature's cruelty. The sarcasm? In a world where one wrong berry could kill you, they immortalize sex as the ultimate survival hack. Don't forget the Ain Sakri lovers, an 11,000-year-old pebble from a Judean cave, carved into two entwined figures mid-coitus. From one angle, it's a phallus, from another, breast. Talk about versatile erotica. Found near Bethlehem, this Natufian artifact screams absurdity. As agriculture dawned and survival shifted from hunting to planting, our ancestors celebrated the shift with pocket-sized porn. The pain? Transitioning eras meant uncertainty, famines if crops failed, conflicts over land, yet they captured intimacy in stone, a sarcastic nod to life's fleeting pleasures. As we delve deeper, consider the Kangjiashi Menji petroglyphs in China's Xinjiang, Bronze Age carvings of hourglass women and ithyphallic men in group sex scenes, complete with bisexual shamans and emerging infants. It's like a prehistoric orgy etched on basalt, blending fertility rites with explicit action. The irony? In a harsh desert where water was gold and nomads fought for survival, they created this tableau of ecstasy, perhaps to appease gods or ensure clan continuity. Comment: would you risk carving erotica in a world where every calorie counted? But let's not romanticize. These weren't carefree artists. Survival was a brutal ballet. Women endured childbirth without aid, often dying young. Men faced hunts that could end in gory death. Yet, in caves like Chauvet in France, where 36,000-year-old paintings include vulvas isolated from bodies, they infused art with erotic depth. Half-human, half-animal hybrids hint at shamanic sex magic, a sarcastic twist on blending beast and desire to conquer fear. The NPR article warns against over-sexualizing. Not all Venuses were porn. Some showed clothed women, symbols of power. But the hidden erotica persists, subtle, ironic, a reminder that in history's nightmare, sex was the spark in the dark. Tease for part 2. More caves, more absurdity. What hidden symbol would you add to a cave wall? Comment now. Welcome back to the torchlit shadows of prehistory, where cave walls whisper tales of survival, sex, and the kind of dark humor that only comes from staring death in the face while clutching a flint tool. If you thought part 1 was a wild romp through the hidden erotica of ancient cave paintings, brace yourself. This second act cranks up the absurdity, diving deeper into the primal pulse of humanity's earliest artists. Picture yourself shivering in a damp cave, the howl of a distant wolf reminding you life's a gamble, yet you're scratching out images of hips, phalluses, and forbidden desires. Why? Because in the Paleolithic nightmare, sex wasn't just a spark, it was a defiant middle finger to extinction. Let's plunge back into the gritty, ironic world where survival's pain met artistic passion. We left off with Venus figurines and explicit etchings, those sassy symbols of fertility and lust carved into stone like prehistoric thirst traps. Now, let's trek to the caves of Lascaux in France, the so-called Sistine Chapel of the Ice Age, dating back 17,000 years. Amid the stampeding bulls and galloping horses, you'll find subtler, sexier secrets. Look closely at the shaft scene in Lascaux's depths. A fallen man, bird-headed with a raging erection, lies beside a bison pierced by a spear. Art historians call it a shamanic vision, but let's not kid ourselves. This guy's pitching a tent in the face of death, a sarcastic nod to life's persistence. The pain of survival? You're hunting megafauna that could gore you in seconds, yet your mind drifts to procreation. The absurdity? Etching the scene in a cave so deep, you're risking your life just to reach it. Imagine crawling through pitch-black tunnels, torch flickering, to immortalize a hard-on. That's commitment. Let's hop to Spain's Cueva de los Aviones, a 50,000-year-old Neanderthal hangout. Here, alongside pierced shells and red ochre, archaeologists found what might be the world's oldest sex toys. Polished stones shaped suspiciously like, well, you know. Were they tools for grinding pigment? Maybe, but their smooth, suggestive curves hint at more intimate uses. Picture a Neanderthal huddled in a cave during a blizzard, crafting a stone companion while the clan starves. The irony? In a world where survival meant outrunning hyenas, they took time to get cozy with rocks. The pain? Constant hunger, cold, and the knowledge that your next hunt might be your last. Yet, these artifacts scream defiance. We'll survive, we'll screw, and we'll do it with style. Comment: would you carve a tool or a toy in a cave? Now, let's swing to the rock art of Val Camonica in Italy, a UNESCO site with carvings spanning 10,000 years. Among the warriors, deer, and plows, you'll spot ithyphallic figures, men with exaggerated erections, often in ritual dances. One scene shows a man chasing a woman, his intentions clear as day. Scholars say it's about fertility rites, but the raw energy feels like a prehistoric rom-com gone wrong. The absurdity? These artists lived in a world where a broken leg could mean death, yet they carved eternal chases as if love or lust could outrun mortality. The pain of survival? Women faced childbirth with no medicine, men battled rival tribes, and everyone fought the elements. Yet they etched their desires into rock, a sarcastic, "we're still here," to the universe. Let's cross to Africa's Sahara, once a lush savanna 7,000 years ago, now a desert hiding erotic gems in places like Tassili Niger. Here, rock paintings show human figures in explicit poses, couples entwined, phalluses prominent, sometimes in groups that suggest communal rites. One image depicts a woman with exaggerated hips, surrounded by men in what looks like a fertility dance. The irony? These were pastoralists, herding cattle under a scorching sun, yet they paused to paint their passions. Survival meant dodging predators in drought, but they celebrated the act that kept the tribe alive. The pain? Losing children to disease, watching crops wither, yet still finding the strength to create art that screams, "We'll keep going." The web whispers of these images being ritualistic, but let's call it what it is, prehistoric erotica, hidden in plain sight. Now, picture the caves of Sulawesi, Indonesia, where 45,000-year-old art rivals Europe's best. Among pigs and hand stencils, you'll find human figures with exaggerated sexual traits, breasts, genitals, even copulation scenes tucked into corners. These weren't public billboards, they were deep in caves meant for initiates or shamans. The absurdity? These artists navigated jungles teeming with danger, yet risked their lives to paint private passions. The pain? Malaria, snake bites, and tribal wars made every day a gamble. Yet they chose to celebrate the spark of life, etching it where only the brave or desperate would see. Comment, what's the riskiest thing you'd do for art? Let's talk about the women in these scenes, because they weren't just passive muses. The Venus figures, like whole fells in Germany, a 40,000-year-old ivory carving with massive breasts and a pronounced vulva, suggest the women were central to survival's narrative. Were they goddesses, ancestors, idealized lovers? Maybe all three. But crafting them took hours, days, in a world where time meant hunting or hiding. The irony? Women who faced the agony of childbirth in caves with no midwives were immortalized as symbols of life's triumph. The pain? Many died young, their bones found clutching infants, yet their images endure, a sarcastic middle finger to death's grip. And the men? Oh, they weren't shy. From France's Peck Mural, where a 25,000-year-old painting shows a man with a prominent erection beside a woman, to Australia's Kimberley region, where rock art depicts copulating couples, men flaunted their virility like badges of honor. But survival's pain was real. Hunting megafauna meant facing beasts that could crush you, and tribal conflicts left scars. Yet, they painted their potency as if saying, "We'll die, but not before we live." The absurdity? Risking precious energy to boast in stone when you might not eat tomorrow. Let's paint a scene to feel this world. You're a hunter in southern France 20,000 years ago. Your clan's starving, the cave's cold, but you've got a piece of ochre and a story to tell. By torchlight, you etch a woman's curves on the wall, her hips a promise of future generations. Outside, a storm rages, and you know half your group won't survive the winter. Your fingers bleed from scraping stone, but you keep going, driven by a mix of lust and hope. The pain? Knowing your art might outlive you, but your kids might not. The irony? You're creating beauty in a world that's anything but. And let's not ignore the shamanic angle, because sex and spirituality were tangled like vines. In caves like Altamira, Spain, hybrid figures, part human, part beast, hint at rituals where sex was magic. Shamans, high on plants or hunger, might have used erotic art to channel fertility or appease spirits. The absurdity? You're tripping out, half-starved, painting orgies to beg for rain or game. The pain? Knowing one bad ritual could doom your tribe. Yet these images endure, a testament to humanity's stubborn need to create, even in hell. As we wrap part 2, reflect on this. Prehistoric artists turned caves into galleries of desire, mocking death with every stroke. Sex was their rebellion, their art a cry against oblivion. Could you carve hope into stone while the world tried to kill you? Drop a comment with your thoughts and tell me what time it is where you are. Part 3's coming, and it's diving deeper into the erotic underworld. Stay tuned. Here we are, folks, plunging back into the primal pulse of prehistory, where cave walls were the original social media, broadcasting humanity's rawest desires in ochre and charcoal. If you thought parts 1 and 2 of our journey through the hidden erotica of ancient cave paintings were wild, buckle up. This third act turns the dial to 11, exposing the absurdity, pain, and sheer audacity of our ancestors' sexy scribbles. Picture yourself in a freezing cave, your breath visible, your fingers numb from scraping stone, yet you're etching images of lovers and lust that scream defiance against a world hell-bent on killing you. In the Paleolithic, sex wasn't just survival, it was a sarcastic jab at death itself. Let's dive deeper into this gritty, ironic saga of art and agony. We've already marveled at Venus figurines, phallic graffiti, and suggestive rock art from Europe to Australia. Now, let's venture to the caves of Font de Gaume in France, a 14,000-year-old gallery where bison and horses share space with subtler, sexier secrets. Tucked among the animals are engraved vulvas, triangular shapes with unmistakable slits, carved with a precision that says, "Yeah, we meant that." These aren't just doodles, they're deliberate, hidden in the cave's deepest chambers, where only torchlight and the brave could find them. The irony? These artists risked their lives crawling through claustrophobic tunnels, dodging cave bears to celebrate the source of life itself, the pain of survival. Every day was a gamble. Starvation, predators, or a sudden flood could wipe out your clan. Yet they carved these symbols as if saying, "We'll die, but not before we leave a mark." Imagine the audacity. You're half starved, your kids are sick, and you're etching erotica like it's your last act of rebellion. Comment, what's the boldest thing you'd create in a world that's falling apart? Let's hop to the rock shelters of Bhimbetka in India, where 10,000-year-old paintings reveal a world of hunters, dancers, and, yes, erotic undertones. Amid scenes of boars and antelopes, you'll find human figures in suggestive poses, women with exaggerated hips, men with prominent phalluses, sometimes locked in what looks like a prehistoric embrace. One panel shows a couple in a dance that screams intimacy, their bodies angled just so. Scholars call it ritualistic, but let's not kid ourselves. This is desire immortalized in pigment. The absurdity? These artists lived in a monsoon-drenched land where floods or tigers could end you, yet they paused to paint passion. The pain? Women gave birth in open shelters, men hunted with flimsy spears, and disease was a constant shadow. But these images shout, "We're here, we're human, we're horny." It's a sarcastic middle finger to a universe that didn't care. Now, let's trek to the Atapuerca Mountains in Spain, where archaeological finds push the clock back 400,000 years to Homo heidelbergensis, our pre-Neanderthal cousins. Among their tools and bones, researchers found engraved stones with vulva-like shapes, early hints of erotic art. These weren't sophisticated, think crude scratches like a caveman's first draft, but the implications are huge. Even before modern humans, our ancestors were obsessed with sex as a symbol of survival. The irony? They barely had language, yet they spoke through carvings that celebrated creation amid destruction. The pain? Life expectancy was maybe 30, childbirth was a death sentence for many, and predators lurked everywhere. Yet they scratched their desires into stone, a defiant act against a world that chewed up hope. Comment, could you find the energy to create art when survival's on the line? Let's swing to the Kalahari Desert's Tsodilo Hills in Botswana, dubbed the Louvre of the Desert for its 4,500 rock paintings spanning millennia. Here, among rhinos and giraffes, you'll spot human figures with exaggerated sexual features, men with erections, women with pronounced curves, some in group scenes that hint at communal rites. One painting shows a man and woman in a pose that's less hunting party and more private party. The web notes these as fertility symbols, but the raw energy feels like erotica cloaked in ritual. The absurdity? These sand artists painted in a parched landscape where water was life, yet they devoted precious time to capturing desire. The pain? Droughts killed crops, clans clashed over resources, and survival was a daily grind. Yet they painted as if sex could outwit the desert's cruelty. Now picture the caves of El Castillo in Spain, home to some of the oldest art at 40,800 years. Alongside hand stencils and red discs, you'll find faint engravings of female forms, breasts, hips, vulvas, tucked into corners like hidden Easter eggs. These weren't for public display. They were deep in the cave, meant for shamans or initiates. The irony: you're risking death by cave-in or oxygen loss to carve something only a few will see. The pain? Your tribe's starving, your mate's sick, and winter's coming. Yet you etch these symbols, a sarcastic bet that life will go on. It's like tweeting into the void, knowing the void might eat you. Let's talk about the role of women, because they weren't just subjects, they were likely artists too. The Venus of Lausel, carved 25,000 years ago in France, shows a woman holding a horn, her body voluptuous, her vulva prominent. Some say she's a goddess, others a self-portrait. Either way, her creator, male or female, spent hours chiseling her into limestone while the mammoths roamed outside. The pain? Women faced childbirth with no painkillers, often dying young, their bones found in shallow graves. The irony? They were deified in art, their bodies celebrated as life-givers, yet their lives were fragile. These carvings feel like a sarcastic nod. We'll immortalize you even if you don't make it to 30. And the men? They weren't just hunters, they were storytellers. In Portugal's Coa Valley, 22,000-year-old engravings show men with phalluses like spears, often in hunting scenes where sex and survival blur. One figure, Ithyphallic in chasing games, seems to say, "I'll kill this deer and keep the species going." The absurdity? You're starving, yet you're carving your virility like it's a resume. The pain? Every hunt was a brush with death, broken bones, gored flesh, yet they etch their potency, a defiant claim to immortality. Let's paint a scene to feel this world. You're a woman in a Siberian cave, 15,000 years ago, part of the Malta culture. You're carving a Venus figurine from mammoth ivory, your hands aching from the cold. Outside, a blizzard buries the steppe, and your clan's down to its last scraps of meat. You shape the figure's curves, dreaming of a future where your children survive. The pain? Knowing half won't make it through winter. The irony? You're creating beauty in a world that's ugly, etching hope while death knocks. You hide the figurine in a crevice, a secret prayer for life. And the shamanic vibe? Oh, it's strong. In caves like Les Trois Frères in France, 15,000-year-old art shows sorcerers, half-human, half-beast figures with erections, dancing in what looks like sex-fueled rituals. Were they channeling fertility gods, invoking animal spirits? The web suggests psychedelics or trance states, but imagine the absurdity. You're starving, hallucinating, painting orgies to beg for rain or game. The pain? One failed ritual could mean famine or worse. Yet, these images endure, a testament to humanity's stubborn spark. As we close part 3, reflect on this. Cave art was a rebellion against oblivion, sex its boldest weapon. These artists laughed in death's face, etching desire into eternity. Could you create under such pressure? Drop a comment with your thoughts and tell me what time it is where you are. Part 4 is coming, and it's the grand finale of Prehistoric Passion. Stay tuned. Alright folks, we've reached the grand, gritty finale of our torchlit trek through the hidden erotica of ancient cave paintings, a saga where humanity's earliest artists turned cold stone into a canvas for desire, defiance, and the kind of dark humor that only comes from surviving a world that wanted you dead. If you've made it through parts 1 to 3, you're tougher than a Paleolithic hunter facing a woolly rhino. Picture yourself in a cave, the air thick with smoke and fear, yet your flint scratches out images of lovers, phalluses, and curves that laugh in the face of extinction. This final act dives into the rawest corners of prehistoric art, where sex was a rebellious cry against the nightmare of survival. Let's wrap this tale with a flourish of irony, pain, and primal passion. We've already gawked at Venus figurines, phallic engravings, and suggestive dances from Europe to Botswana. Now, let's head to the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa, where sandrock art from 3,000 years ago paints a vivid picture of survival and sensuality. Amid antelopes and hunters, you'll find human figures in trance-like dances, some with exaggerated sexual features, men with erections, women with pronounced hips, their poses suggesting rituals that blur sex and spirituality. One scene shows a group of figures, hands linked, bodies angled in what feels like a fertility rite gone wild. The irony? These artists lived in a rugged land where drought or rival clans could wipe you out, yet they painted passion like it was their last act. The pain, starvation, disease, and the constant threat of violence made every day a gamble. Yet they etched their desires, a sarcastic "we're still here" to a merciless world. Comment, what's the boldest thing you'd paint to defy death? Let's swing to the Arnhem Land in Australia, where Aboriginal rock art stretches back 40,000 years. Among kangaroos and fish, you'll spot the Mimi spirits, stick-like figures with oversized genitals, often in copulating poses. These weren't just dirty doodles, they were tied to Dreamtime stories, where creation and sex intertwined. One painting shows a couple locked in an embrace, their bodies a testament to life's persistence. The absurdity? These artists navigated a landscape of venomous snakes and brutal heat, yet they climbed cliffs to paint their passions. The pain? Losing kin to flash floods or starvation, knowing your next hunt might be your last. Yet, they created art that screams, "We'll love, we'll live, we'll last." It's a prehistoric erotica, with a side of survival's grit. Now, let's visit the caves of Maros Pangkep in Indonesia, where 44,000-year-old art includes human-animal hybrids with suggestive traits, phalluses, breasts, poses that hint at ritualistic sex. One image, tucked in a high crevice, shows a figure with an erection chasing another, possibly a shamanic scene of fertility magic. The irony? You're risking a fatal fall to paint something only the initiated will see. The pain? Malaria, predators, and tribal feuds made life a daily roll of the dice. Yet these artists chose to celebrate the spark of life, etching it in places where the gods or spirits might notice. It's like leaving a love letter in a war zone, knowing you might not survive to read the reply. Let's talk about the tools of this trade, because creating erotic art wasn't easy. Take the Gravettian culture in Europe, 30,000 years ago, where artists used flint burns to carve Venus figurines like the one from Dolní Vistanec in the Czech Republic, a ceramic beauty with massive breasts and hips fired in a primitive kiln. Imagine the effort. You're shivering in a glacial valley, your fingers bleeding from carving, yet you're molding clay to capture desire. The absurdity? You're burning precious fuel to fire a figurine while your clan huddles for warmth. The pain? Knowing your art might outlive you, but your kids might not make it through winter. These figurines weren't just erotica, they were prayers, sarcastic bets against a brutal world. Comment, what's the most you'd sacrifice for a piece of art? And the rituals? Oh, they were wild. In caves like Cognac in France, 25,000-year-old paintings show human figures with vulvas and phalluses alongside wounded animals, suggesting sex was part of hunting magic. Picture a shaman, high on chewed roots or starvation, painting a copulating couple to ensure a good hunt. The irony, you're hallucinating, half dead, yet creating art to beg for life. The pain, one failed ritual could mean famine, your clan's survival hanging by a thread. Yet these images endure, a testament to humanity's stubborn need to create, even in chaos. Let's focus on the women, because their role in this art is undeniable. The Venus of Montplaisir, a 20,000-year-old French carving, shows a woman with exaggerated curves, possibly a self-portrait or a tribute to a matriarch. Women likely painted too. Hand stencils in caves like Gargas, France, show smaller hands suggesting female artists. The pain? Childbirth was a death sentence for many, with no medicine to ease the agony. The irony? They were immortalized as goddesses, their bodies celebrated, yet their lives were fragile. These images feel like a sarcastic nod, will make you eternal even if you don't survive the next birth. Men too were bold storytellers. In Brazil's Lapa do Santo, 9,000-year-old rock art shows men with phalluses like spears, often in scenes of conflict or ritual. One figure, ithai-phallic and holding a weapon, seems to say, "I'll fight, I'll love, I'll live." The absurdity? You're carving your virility while dodging rival tribes or jaguars. The pain? Every hunt or battle left scars, physical and mental. Yet they etch their potency, a defiant claim to existence in a world that didn't care. Let's paint a final scene to bring this home. You're a hunter in the Sahara, 8,000 years ago, part of a pastoral clan. By firelight, you paint a woman's curves on a rock shelter, her hips a promise of future generations. Outside, the desert creeps closer, and your cattle are dying. Your hands shake from hunger, but you keep painting, driven by hope or lust or both. The pain? Knowing your clan might not survive the drought. The irony? You're creating beauty in a world that's turning to dust, etching love while death looms. You hide the painting under an overhang, a secret for the spirits. And the legacy? These artworks weren't just erotica, they were survival's manifesto. From Siberia's Malta figurines to Australia's Bradshaw paintings, our ancestors used sex to laugh at death, to mock the chaos of their world. The web notes how modern scholars often sanitize these images, calling them symbolic and to avoid scandal. But let's be real. These were prehistoric love letters, raw and unfiltered, hidden in caves to outlast their creators. As we close this saga, reflect on this. Cave art was humanity's first rebellion, sex its boldest weapon. These artists carved desire into eternity, spitting in the face of oblivion. Could you create under such pressure, knowing each stroke might be your last? Drop a comment with your survival strategy, and tell me what time it is where you are. Thanks for joining me on this wild, primal ride through prehistory's darkest corners. If you loved it, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's keep unearthing the past's secrets together. Until next time, keep your flint sharp and your desires bolder. Imagine a king lounging on a throne carved from ivory and gold, surrounded by dozens of wives, each one a political pawn, a breeding machine, and a potential assassin in waiting. While outside his palace, subjects starve, wars rage, and survival hangs by a thread of cunning alliances sealed in the bedroom. This isn't a soap opera. It's the absurd, blood-soaked reality of polygamy among African kings, where love was a luxury and power was everything. Ah, the grand, grotesque theater of African monarchies, where polygamy wasn't just a marital quirk, but a high-stakes Game of Thrones, complete with backstabbing, baby-making marathons, and enough irony to make you question if history was written by sadistic playwrights. Picture this. You're an African king in the ancient world. Your kingdom a patchwork of rival clans, treacherous neighbors, and gods who demand tribute in blood and heirs. Survival isn't about outliving your enemies. It's about outbreeding them. Enter polygamy, the ultimate power tool, where wives were collected like trading cards, each one forging alliances, popping out soldiers, and ensuring your lineage didn't fizzle out in a famine or feud. But, oh, the absurdity. In a continent where life was a daily dice roll against drought, disease, and invaders, kings hoarded spouses like misers with gold, turning bedrooms into battlegrounds and harems into hotbeds of intrigue. The pain? For the women, it was a life of competition, confinement, and childbirth roulette. For the kings, a constant paranoia that one wife might poison your porridge while another plotted with her clan. Yet, this madness built empires. Let's dive into this sarcastic saga, where history's nightmare unfolds with a wink and a wince. Start with ancient Egypt, folks, because if you're going to talk polygamy and power, you can't skip the pharaohs, those god kings who turned the Nile into a stage for divine debauchery. Take Amenhotep III, ruling in the 14th century BCE, a guy who collected wives like scarabs. He had his chief wife, Ti, but that wasn't enough for a man playing God. No, he snagged foreign princesses from Babylon, Mitanni, and beyond, each marriage a diplomatic dagger wrapped in silk. Why? Survival in the ancient world meant alliances against Hittites or Assyrians, and what better way than bedding a rival's daughter? The absurdity peaks when you realize these weren't romantic unions. Amenhotep's harem was a political zoo, with wives shipped like exotic goods, their value measured in dowries of gold and chariots. Imagine the pain. A princess from a distant land, torn from home, plopped into a palace where she's just one of many, expected to breed heirs while navigating court intrigue that could end in a cobra's kiss. But hey, it worked. Amenhotep's reign was golden, his power amplified by these marital mergers. Comment below. If you were a pharaoh, how many wives would you need to feel secure? And in what time is it where you're watching? Fast forward to the Mali Empire, where Mansa Musa, yes, the richest man in history, the guy who crashed Egypt's economy with his gold, played the polygamy game like a pro. But before Musa, there was Sundiata Keita, the legendary founder in the 13th century, whose epic tale is laced with multiple wives as plot devices. Sundiata's mother was one of many in his father's harem, and the rivalries between co-wives nearly derailed his destiny. Polygamy here was absurdly strategic. Kings like Sundiata married into clans to knit the empire together, turning potential enemies into in-laws. More wives meant more sons for armies, more daughters for alliances, and a buffer against assassination. After all, who wants to kill dad when your half-brother might inherit? The pain of survival? In the Sahel's harsh sands, where droughts could wipe out harvest, a king's harem was a human insurance policy. But for the women, it was endless competition, with favorites rising and falling like the Niger River. One wrong word, and you're demoted to the outer quarters, your children sidelined in the succession scramble. Musa's own polygamy amplified his power. With the wives from various ethnic groups, he unified a vast empire, but at what cost? Whispers of jealousy-fueled plots, the constant fear of poison in the kola nuts. It's historical comedy gold. The world's richest man, yet his wealth couldn't buy harmony in the bedroom. Now, let's trek south to the kingdom of Buganda, where kings turned polygamy into a masterclass in paranoia and politics. In the 19th century, Kabaka kings like Suno de Seged amassed hundreds of wives, yes, hundreds, to symbolize their might and secure loyalty. Each wife came from a different clan, a living treaty that bound the kingdom's fractious nobles. The absurdity? These kings lived in opulent palaces like the Lubir, surrounded by luxury, but their harems were powder kegs of rivalry. Wives schemed for their son's succession, turning the court into a viper's nest where a favorite could be toppled by a whispered rumor. Survival's pain hit hard. For the king, it was eternal vigilance. Soon reportedly executed wives suspected of disloyalty, their bodies fed to crocodiles as a warning. For the women, snatched from villages, it was a gilded cage, birthing heirs in agony without modern medicine. Knowing a stillborn could mean disgrace. Yet, the system built Buganda into a powerhouse, conquering neighbors through alliances sealed in matrimony. Imagine the daily drama. Breakfast with wife number 47, plotting against number 12's clan while famine ravages the peasantry outside. Comment if this sounds like your idea of royal life. What's the craziest power move you'd make as a king? Don't think Egypt and West Africa had a monopoly. Head to the Ashanti Empire in modern Ghana, where Asantehene kings like S3xual Kwame in the early 19th century hoarded wives like gold dust. Polygamy was the glue of empire building. Marrying into Akan clans forged unbreakable bonds with each wife ambassador for her people. The irony? The Ashanti were matrilineal. Heirs came through the mother's line, so kings married strategically to control succession, turning family trees into tangled webs of intrigue. The pain? Wars with the British loomed. Slaves were traded for guns, and survival meant constant expansion, with wives as currency. A queen mother might wield power, but lesser wives toiled in obscurity, their value tied to fertility. S3xual's harem was legendary, but so were the executions for infidelity. Heads rolled, literally, to maintain order. It's absurd. A king draped in kente cloth, symbol of wealth, yet his power rested on bedroom diplomacy, where one jealous wife could unravel it all. Shift gears to the Zulu kingdom, where polygamy fueled the rise of legends like Shaka Zulu in the early 1800s. Shaka's father, Senzanga Kona, was a classic polygamous chief with multiple wives producing heirs who fought like cats in a sack. Shaka himself avoided marriage, fearing it would weaken him, but his successors like Mpandi embraced it, marrying dozens to build alliances amid the Mafikon Wars. The absurdity reaches peak when you realize Zulu kings used harems to control regiments. Wives were rewards for loyal warriors, but the king kept the best for himself. Survival's nightmare. In a time of endless conflict, where empires, armies clashed with assegais, a king's many sons meant ready soldiers, but also endless succession squabbles. Women endured brutal initiations, childbirth in kraals without aid, and the constant threat of being gifted to allies. Mpande's polygamy stabilized his rule after Shaka's chaos, but at the cost of familial bloodbaths, brothers killing brothers for the throne. Picture the pain, a wife watching her son march to war, knowing polygamy's bounty meant more cannon fodder for the king's ambitions. Comment: could you handle the drama of a Zulu harem? What's your survival tip for royal intrigue? Venture to Ethiopia, where emperors like Menelik II in the late 19th century played the polygamy card to unify a fractured land. Menelik married strategically. Taitu Batul, his chief wife, was a political powerhouse, but he had others from rival regions to cement loyalty. The irony? Ethiopia resisted colonialism, partly thanks to these marital maneuvers, but the harem was a hot mess of jealousy and plots. Taitu allegedly poisoned rivals, turning the palace into a poisoner's paradise. Survival sting. Amid famines and Italian invasions, emperors relied on polygamy for heirs and alliances, but women faced seclusion, disease, and the agony of losing children to malaria or war. Menelik's power games peaked at Adwa, where his unified forces crushed Italy, but back home, co-wives schemed like chess masters. It's historical absurdity. A Christian emperor, preaching monogamy in church, yet practicing polygamy to save his throne. As part 1 wraps, ponder this. Polygamy wasn't romance, it was raw power politics, laced with the pain of survival in a continent where kings built legacies on beds of intrigue. From Egypt's pharaohs to Zulu chiefs, it's a tale of absurdity, hoarding wives like shields against doom. What do you think? Genius strategy or recipe for chaos? Drop a comment with your take, and tell me what time it is where you are. Part 2's coming with more kings, more madness. Stay tuned for the bloodier bits. Welcome back to the gilded, blood-soaked saga of polygamy and power games among African kings, where thrones were built on marriages, harems were war rooms, and love was a luxury you'd be lucky to survive. If part 1's glimpse into this historical nightmare left you reeling, brace yourself. This second act dives deeper into the absurd, cutthroat world of royal bedrooms, where every wife was a chess piece, every child a soldier, and every kiss a calculated risk. Picture yourself as a king in a palace of wood and gold, surrounded by dozens of wives plotting your rise or your ruin, while outside, famine, war, and betrayal threatened to topple your empire. Polygamy wasn't just a lifestyle, it was a sarcastic wager against annihilation, a game where the stakes were life, death, and dynastic glory. Let's plunge into the next chapter of this darkly comic tale, where survival's pain meets the absurdity of power. We left off with pharaohs, Malian Mansas, and Zulu chiefs juggling wives like diplomatic grenades. Now, let's trek to the kingdom of Dahomey, where 18th century kings like Agaja turned polygamy into a masterclass in military might and marital mayhem. Dahomey was no ordinary kingdom. Its capital, Abomi, was a fortress of ambition, its economy fueled by slave raids, and its kings wielded harems like weapons. Agaja, conqueror extraordinaire, married women from vassal states to secure loyalty, each wife a living treaty. But here's the kicker. Dahomey's famous Amazon warriors, women soldiers who could lop off heads with machetes, were often drawn from the king's harem, declared wives to keep them loyal. The irony: these women, trained to kill, were technically co-wives with the palace's pampered consorts, creating a harem where jealousy could spark a coup or a beheading. Survival's pain hit hard. For the king, it was balancing these fierce women against scheming nobles. For the wives, it was fighting for status in a court where a misstep meant exile or execution. Imagine the absurdity: a king boasting hundreds of wives, some wielding swords, others weaving plots, all while he dodges poison in his palm wine. Comment: would you rather be a warrior wife or a scheming consort in Dahomey? Drop your pick and tell me what time it is where you're watching. Let's swing to the Songhai Empire, where Askia Muhammad, the 15th century ruler, took polygamy to empire-building extremes. Songhai was West Africa's juggernaut, stretching from the Niger River to the Sahara's edge, and Askia's harem was a diplomatic powerhouse. He married daughters of vassal chiefs, cementing control over fractious tribes, and his wives bore sons who became governors or generals. The absurdity? Askia's court in Gao was a glittering hub of trade, gold, salt, slaves, yet his power rested on bedroom politics, where one jealous wife could tip the scales toward rebellion. The pain? For the women, it was a life of gilded confinement, producing heirs in a malaria-ridden land where childbirth was a gamble. For Askia, it was constant vigilance. Rivals like his own son Musa plotted coups, often egged on by disgruntled co-wives. Picture the scene: a king dining with wife number 20, her clan's loyalty secured by her womb, while wife number 15 whispers treason in the shadows. It's a historical soap opera, where polygamy built empires but also lit the fuse for their fall. Comment: could you handle the stress of Askia's harem politics? What's your survival strategy? Now let's journey to the Oyo Empire in modern Nigeria, where 17th century Alafins, kings like Ajagbo, turned polygamy into a bureaucratic art form. Oyo was a Yoruba powerhouse, its cavalry feared, its markets bursting with kola nuts and cloth. The Alafins' palace at Oyo-Il was a labyrinth of intrigue, with hundreds of wives organized like a corporate hierarchy. Chief wives, lesser consorts, and slaves turned wives, each with a role. The irony? The Alafin was a divine king, yet his power hinged on mortal marriages, each wife a link to a noble family or rival state. A single marriage could secure a trade route or an army's loyalty, but it also bred chaos. Co-wives competed to elevate their sons, poisoning rivals or bribing priests. Survival's sting was brutal. For the king, it was dodging assassination attempts, like the infamous cursed cola incidents. For the women, it was navigating a court where beauty and fertility were your only currency, and a barren womb meant obscurity. The absurdity peaks when you realize the Alafin's mother, the Iya Oba, often held more sway than his wives, turning the harem into a matriarchal chessboard. Imagine the daily grind, a wife weaving cloth for her husband's coronation, knowing her rival's son might inherit, while the king plans his next conquest, marital and military. Comment: would you play the Oyo power game as a king or a cunning wife? Share your move. Let's pivot to the Kanem Bornu Empire, straddling modern Chad and Nigeria, where Mai kings like Idris Aluma in the 16th century used polygamy to stitch together a sprawling Sahelian realm. Kanem Bornu was a trade empire, its caravans hauling slaves and ivory across the Sahara, and its kings married strategically to bind ethnic groups, Kanuri, Hausa, and others. Idris, a warrior king who modernized his army with muskets, had a harem that doubled as a diplomatic corps. Each wife was a bridge to a tribe, her children potential rulers or hostages. The irony? Idris preached Islamic piety, yet his harem was a hotbed of pagan-inspired intrigue, with wives consulting diviners to curse rivals. The pain? For the king, it was constant war, against desert raiders or internal rebels, while watching his back for palace plots. For the women, it was surviving childbirth in a land of sand and sickness, knowing a rival's son could eclipse your own. Picture the absurdity: a king praying 5 times a day, then negotiating peace with a rival by offering a daughter from wife number 30, while wife number 10 slips a charm under his pillow. It's power politics with a side of dark comedy, where survival meant outsmarting your own family. Comment: could you navigate Kanem Bornu's harem drama? What's your trick to stay alive? Let's paint a scene to feel this world. You're a wife in the Buganda kingdom, 19th century, one of Kabaka Mutesafrim's many consorts. Dawn breaks over Lake Victoria, and you're weaving reeds for the palace, your fingers raw. Your son, a potential heir, trains with warriors, but you know rival wives plot his downfall. The king summons you to the Lubiri, where you perform a ritual dance, your beauty a weapon to keep his favor. But whispers spread. Wife number 23 accuses you of witchcraft. The pain? Knowing a false accusation could mean execution, your body tossed to the crocodiles. The irony? You're a queen in a palace of splendor, yet your life hangs on the king's mood and your womb's output. You pray to the spirits, hoping your son outlives the court's vipers. And the kids? Oh, they were pawns in this game. In kingdoms like Congo, where 16th century Mana-Congos married to unify clans, children of lesser wives were often sent as hostages to allies or sacrificed in rituals to appease gods. The irony? Polygamy ensured a surplus of heirs, but also endless succession wars. Think Mana-Congo Alvaro I, whose half-brothers sparked rebellions. The pain? Mothers watched their sons march to war or exile, knowing their status depended on fertility and favor. It's absurd. A system designed for stability bred chaos, with kids caught in the crossfire. As we wrap part 2, reflect on this. Polygamy was a king's sword and shield, but it cut both ways. Wives were power, but also peril, their rivalries fueling empires and funerals. Could you survive this Game of Thrones where every night was a roll of the dice? Drop a comment with your strategy and tell me what time it is where you are. Part 3's coming, and it's diving deeper into the bloody, absurd heart of royal harems. Stay tuned. Buckle up, folks, we're diving back into the twisted, glittering chaos of African kings and their polygamous power plays, where harems were less about romance and more about surviving a political knife fight in a palace of silk and suspicion. If parts 1 and 2 of this historical horror show left you gasping at the sheer audacity of it all, hold tight. This third act ramps up the absurdity, peeling back the curtain on kingdoms where wives were currency, children were chess pieces, and every bedroom tryst could end in a beheading. Picture yourself as a king, your throne a precarious perch atop a pile of rivalries, with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of wives plotting, praying, or poisoning their way to influence. Polygamy wasn't just a perk of power, it was a sarcastic gamble against betrayal, famine, and the gods' fickle whims. Let's wade deeper into this nightmare, where survival's pain meets the dark comedy of dynastic intrigue. We left off with Dahome's warrior wives, Songhai's diplomatic harems, and Oyo's bureaucratic bedlam. Now, let's trek to the kingdom of Eswatini, where Swazi kings like Sobhuza I in the early 19th century turned polygamy into a masterclass in nation-building. Eswatini was a land of rolling hills and constant threats, Zulu raids, Boer incursions, and internal clan feuds. Sobhuza married over 70 wives, each a strategic alliance with a clan or neighboring tribe. weaving a web of loyalty that held his fledgling kingdom together. The irony? This guy was a unifier, yet his harem was a pressure cooker of jealousy, with the wives competing to elevate their sons as heirs. Survival's sting was brutal. For the king, it was dodging assassination plots, often whispered in the ears of ambitious co-wives. For the women, it was a life of ritual and rivalry, bearing children in a land where drought or war could snatch them away. Picture the absurdity. Sobuza, draped in leopard skins, negotiating peace with a rival chief by offering a daughter from wife number 42, while wife number 17 slips a curse into his meal. It's a royal soap opera where the crown was won or lost in the bedroom. Comment: would you dare be a Swazi queen plotting for your son's throne? Drop your strategy and tell me what time it is where you're watching. Let's swing to the great Zimbabwe, the stone-walled empire that dazzled southern Africa from the 11th to 15th centuries. Its kings, ruling from a city of granite grandeur, used polygamy to cement power over a trade network stretching to the Indian Ocean. Gold, ivory, and wives, these were the currencies of empire. A king like Matoda married daughters of vassal chiefs to secure tribute, each wife a link in a chain of loyalty across Shona clans. The irony? This was a society of wealth, with palaces rivaling Europe's, yet the harem was a hotbed of intrigue, where a single rumor could spark a clan war. Survival's pain hit hard. For the king, it was balancing wives from rival factions, knowing one misstep could ignite rebellion. For the women, it was a life of gilded confinement, their status tied to fertility in a land where malaria and drought were relentless. Imagine the scene. A wife adorned in copper beads, weaving cloth for the king's court, knowing her rival's son might inherit the throne, while hers is sent to guard a distant outpost. The absurdity? A king's power rested on his ability to juggle dozens of wives, each a potential ally or assassin, while the empire's wealth flowed through their hands. Comment: could you navigate Great Zimbabwe's harem politics? What's your power play? Now, let's head to the Luba Empire in modern Congo, where 17th century kings like Kalala Ilunga used polygamy to weave a divine narrative. Luba kings were seen as semi-gods, their authority tied to sacred lineage, and their harems were less about lust and more about cosmic order. Each wife, often from allied clans, bore children who extended the king's sacred bloodline, linking villages through kinship. The irony? These kings preached unity, yet their harems were battlegrounds of ambition, with co-wives vying for their sons to be named Balapawe, king. The pain? For the king, it was constant vigilance. Luba history is littered with tales of poisoned kings, often by disgruntled wives or their kin. For the women, it was surviving childbirth in a jungle rife with disease. Knowing a barren womb could mean banishment. Picture the absurdity. A king anointed with sacred oils, performing rituals to appease ancestors, while his wives consult diviners to curse rivals. It's a divine comedy where polygamy was both a blessing and a curse, building empires while sowing discord. Comment: would you risk being a Luba wife, betting on your son's rise? Share your tactic. Let's pivot to the Benin Kingdom, where Obas, kings like Aware the Great in the 15th century, turned polygamy into an art of control. Benin's bronze plaques immortalize its grandeur, but behind the palace walls, the harem was a political machine. Iwara married women from Edo clans and neighboring states, each a diplomatic chess move to secure trade routes or tribute. The irony? Benin's kings were revered as divine, yet their power hinged on mortal marriages, with wives acting as spies, diplomats, or pawns. Survival's sting was relentless. For the king, it was dodging plots. Uwera reportedly executed a wife for conspiring with her brother. For the women, it was a life of competition, their children's fate tied to their influence in a court where bronze daggers were as common as compliments. Imagine the daily grind, a wife crafting offerings for the Oba's ancestors, knowing her rivals whispering treason to the palace guards. The absurdity peaks when you realize Benin's wealth, ivory, pepper, slaves, flowed through a system where a king's survival depended on keeping his harem in check. Comment: could you outsmart Benin's court intrigue? Drop your survival tip. Let's paint a scene to feel this world. You're a young wife in the Kanem Bornu Empire, 16th century, one of Mai Dinama's many consorts. Dawn breaks over Lake Chad, and you're grinding millet, your hands calloused, your mind racing. Your daughter, a potential bride for a rival chief, is your ticket to influence, but wife number 12 accuses you of witchcraft. The king summons you to his court, where you offer gifts of cloth to secure his favor. The pain? Knowing a false accusation could mean death by strangling, your body left in the desert. The irony? You're a queen in a palace of mud and gold, yet your life hangs on your fertility and your rival's silence. You slip a charm to a diviner, praying your daughter's marriage seals an alliance before the court's vipers strike. And the children? They were the ultimate stakes in this game. In kingdoms like Asante, where matrilineal succession made mothers kingmakers, children of lesser wives were often pawns, sent as hostages to allies or groomed as warriors. The irony? Polygamy ensured a flood of heirs, but also succession wars, like when Asante Hene Kusi Obadom's death in 1764 sparked a free-for-all among his sons. The pain? Mothers watch their children march to war or exile, their status tied to a son's survival. It's absurd, a system meant to secure dynasties bred chaos, with kids as collateral damage. As we close part 3, reflect on this. Polygamy was a king's arsenal, but it fired in all directions. Wives were power, but also peril, their rivalries shaping empires and graves. Could you survive this palace of plots where every child was a gamble? Drop a comment with your strategy and tell me what time it is where you are. Part 4 is coming, and it's the bloody, absurd finale of this royal drama. Stay tuned. Here we are, folks, at the grand, blood-drenched finale of our saga through the polygamy and power games of African kings, where thrones were forged in bedrooms, harems doubled as war rooms, and survival was a sarcastic tightrope walk over a pit of vipers. If you've survived parts 1 through 3, you're tougher than a Zulu warrior staring down a rival impi. Picture yourself as a king, your palace a glittering maze of ambition, surrounded by wives who are your greatest allies and deadliest threats, their whispers sharper than any spear. Polygamy wasn't just a royal perk, it was a high-stakes chess game where every move could crown you or cost your head. This final act dives into the darkest corners of Africa's kingdoms, where love was a myth, power was everything, and the absurdity of it all could make you laugh or cry. Let's wrap this nightmare with a flourish of irony, pain, and dynastic drama. We've already danced through Dahome's warrior wives, Songhai's diplomatic bedlam, and Eswatini's nation-building harems. Now, let's head to the kingdom of Aksum in ancient Ethiopia, where 4th century kings like Ezana played polygamy like a divine symphony. Aksum was a trade titan, its ports buzzing with ivory, gold, and frankincense, its kings claiming descent from Solomon himself. Ezana, the guy who brought Christianity to the Horn, married multiple wives from vassal tribes to knit his empire together. Each wife was a treaty, her children a bridge to distant regions. The irony? Ezana preached biblical virtues, yet his harem was a hotbed of pagan-inspired intrigue, with wives wielding influence through charm or curses. Survival's sting was brutal. For the king, it was dodging plots from ambitious co-wives or their clans, often backed by rival priests. For the women, it was bearing heirs in a land of drought and disease, knowing a rival's son could eclipse yours. Picture the absurdity, a Christian king praying for salvation, while wife number 8 consults a diviner to hex wife number 3's pregnancy. It's a divine comedy where polygamy built empires but bred betrayal. Comment: would you play Aksum's harem game as a king or a cunning wife? Drop your move and tell me what time it is where you're watching. Let's trek to the kingdom of Mutapa in southern Africa, where 15th century kings like Nyatsimba Mutoda turned polygamy into a gold-fueled power grab. Mutapa's wealth came from mines and trade with Swahili coast, but its stability rested on marital alliances. Kings married daughters of local chiefs, each wife securing a region's loyalty or a trade route's flow. The irony? Mutapa's stone palaces screamed permanence, yet the harem was a chaos engine, with wives plotting to elevate their sons as Mwene Mutapa, king. Survival's pain was relentless. For the king, it was constant war against Portuguese intruders or internal rebels, often egged on by disgruntled wives. For the women, it was a life of gilded peril, birthing children in a malaria-ridden land, knowing a stillborn could mean disgrace. Imagine the scene: a wife draped in imported cloth, offering gold to the king's court, while whispering to her clan to sabotage a rival's son. The absurdity? A king's power rested on his ability to juggle dozens of wives, each a potential spy or savior, while the empire's gold flowed through their schemes. Comment: could you outwit Mutapa's harem politics? Share your strategy. Now, let's swing to the Kuba kingdom in modern Congo, where 17th century kings like Sham Aimbul used polygamy to craft a cultural masterpiece. Kuba was an artistic powerhouse, its masks and textiles legendary, but its kings relied on harems to unify clans. Each wife, often from a powerful family, brought loyalty and artisans to the court. The irony? Sham's reign was a golden age of creativity, yet his harem was a battlefield, with co-wives vying for their sons to inherit the Nayim title. Survival's sting was fierce. For the king, it was dodging poison, Kuba history, whispers of wives slipping toxins into palm wine. For the women, it was navigating a court where beauty and fertility were currency, and a barren womb meant obscurity. Picture the absurdity: a king admiring a carved statue, unaware that wife number 15's clan is plotting a coup because her son was snubbed. It's a cultural utopia built on a powder keg of polygamous rivalries. Comment: would you thrive as a Kuba queen, weaving art and intrigue? Drop your tactic. Let's pivot to the kingdom of Nri in Igbo land, Nigeria, where Eze Nri, kings like Nri Ifikwanem in the 11th century, used polygamy to weave a spiritual empire. Nri was a theocracy, its kings seen as divine mediators, and their harems were less about conquest and more about sacred kinship. Wives from Igbo clans bore children who spread the king's spiritual influence, acting as priests or emissaries. The irony? Nri preached peace, yet the harem was a hotbed of ambition, with wives pushing their sons for prominence in a system where spiritual power trumped military might. Survival's pain was subtle, but real. For the king, it was maintaining divine aura while dodging accusations of favoritism. For the women, it was enduring childbirth without medicine, knowing their status hinged on producing a son who'd carry the sacred staff. Imagine the absurdity: a king performing rituals to cleanse the land, while his wives barter for their children's futures with offerings of yams and oracles. It's a spiritual drama where polygamy was both a blessing and a curse. Comment: could you navigate Nuri's sacred harem? Share your survival tip. Let's paint a final scene to bring this home. You're a wife in the kingdom of Luango, 17th century, one of the Mana Congo's many consorts. Dawn breaks over the Atlantic coast and you're weaving palm fibers, your hands raw, your mind sharp. Your son, a potential heir, trains as a trader, but wife number 9 accuses you of cursing her child's illness. The king summons you to his court, where you offer ivory to secure his favor. The pain? Knowing a false accusation could mean exile or worse, your body left to the sea. The irony? You're a queen in a palace of coral and shells, yet your life hangs on your womb and your rival's silence. You pray to the ancestors, slipping a charm to a priestess, hoping your son rises before the court's sharks devour him. And the legacy? Polygamy was a king's sword, but it cut both ways. From Aksum's Christian kings to Nuri's divine mediators, it built empires by binding clans, but it also sowed chaos, succession wars, poisonings, betrayals. The web notes how colonial powers exploited these rivalries, weakening kingdoms like Buganda or Asante. Yet the absurdity endures. Kings hoarded wives to defy death, only to find death waiting in their own beds. The pain? Women and children bore the brunt, their lives spent as pawns in a game where love was a footnote. As we close this saga, reflect on this. Polygamy was Africa's royal gambit, a defiant bet against collapse, but it turned palaces into battlegrounds. Could you survive this world of intrigue, where every kiss was a contract and every child a risk? Drop a comment with your survival strategy, and tell me what time it is where you are. Thanks for joining me on this wild, bloody ride through Africa's royal past. If you loved it, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's keep unearthing history's darkest corners together. Until next time, keep your alliances tight and your poison detectors sharper. Forget the cherry blossoms, forget the stoic glares and the poetic death verses. Forget every impossibly cool, slicked-back hair, one-man army fantasy you've ever had about the samurai. We're going behind the paper screens, past the polished armor, and into the cramped, smelly, and frankly bizarre reality of their daily lives. This isn't the story of legendary warriors. This is the story of chronically constipated, financially unstable, and profoundly bored government employees who just happen to carry a very, very sharp sword. Welcome to the secret, absurd, and often disgusting life of the samurai, behind closed doors. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll be thanking the gods you were born in an era with indoor plumbing and a 401k. Let's start with the basics, shall we? The very foundation of a samurai's existence. No, not honor, not loyalty. I'm talking about rice. Glorious, glorious rice. For most of Japanese history, the entire economy ran on these tiny white grains. A samurai's wealth, his status, his entire yearly salary, was measured in koku, a unit of rice supposedly enough to feed one man for 1 year. Sounds simple, right? A feudal lord pays you in rice, you eat the rice, you fight his battles. Except, it was a logistical nightmare from hell. Imagine your boss, instead of direct deposit, just backed a literal dump truck full of rice onto your front lawn. Now what? You can't pay your sword polisher with a sack of uncooked grains. You can't buy a new kimono for your wife by tossing a handful of rice at a merchant. No, you had to haul this mountain of carbohydrates to a rice broker who would, of course, take a hefty cut, haggle over the quality, and then give you actual currency, which was constantly fluctuating in value against, you guessed it, rice. Many samurai, especially the lower-ranked ones who made up the vast majority of the warrior class, were trapped in a perpetual cycle of debt to these rice merchants. They were living rice shipment to rice shipment, or rather, paycheck to paycheck. There are countless records of samurai families so poor they had to take up side hustles. We're talking about crafting umbrellas, making sandals, or even raising crickets to sell as pets. Picture this: a man trained to be a walking weapon, a master of the blade who has sworn an oath to die for his lord, is sitting in his tiny hut meticulously gluing paper onto a bamboo frame because his kid needs new shoes and the price of rice just dropped. It's the kind of soul-crushing irony that history loves to serve up. The so-called ruling class was often broker than the merchants they secretly despised. They had the status, but the merchant had the cash. And in a changing world, cash was rapidly becoming the new katana. Now, let's talk about the home. The romantic image is a serene Zen garden, minimalist rooms, and elegant art. The reality? Cramped, smoky, and cold. Most samurai houses, especially in the bustling city of Edo, were made of wood, mud, and paper, great for catching a breeze, terrible for insulation, and absolutely fantastic for burning to the ground, which they did with horrifying regularity. A common saying in Edo was that fires and quarrels were the city's flowers. Imagine huddling with your family around a charcoal brazier in the dead of winter, the smoke stinging your eyes, wearing every piece of clothing you own, while a draft that feels like it's coming straight from the Siberian tundra whistles through your paper walls. It wasn't exactly a cozy existence, and privacy, a hilarious concept. Those elegant paper screens, the shoji, offered about as much soundproofing as a wet napkin. Every argument, every awkward bodily function, every whispered secret was semi-public information for the entire household and possibly the neighbors. You think your apartment walls are thin? Try living in a house where the only thing separating you from your mother-in-law is a sheet of paper. It's a recipe for a special kind of domestic insanity. Let's move on to something even more personal. Hygiene. The samurai are often depicted as immaculately clean, almost supernaturally so. And yes, they did value cleanliness, but their methods were interesting. Let's start with the toilet. Forget your porcelain throne. The typical toilet was a wooden box over a pit, a simple, effective, and eye-wateringly pungent solution. In wealthier households, this might be a slightly fancier affair, but the basic principle was the same. The waste was collected by night soil merchants and used as fertilizer for farms. It was the great circle of life, and it smelled exactly as you'd imagine. There are even samurai training manuals that include instructions on how to use the latrine properly while wearing your full armor and 2 swords. Think about the logistics of that for a moment. It's not just about aiming, it's a full-body exercise in desperation and balance. Bathing was a communal affair. While some high-ranking lords had their own private baths, most people, samurai included, went to public bathhouses, the sento. These were hubs of social activity, but they weren't the serene, spa-like experiences we might picture. Men, women, and children often bathed together in the same large hot tub. The water was, well, it was recycled. You'd wash yourself off before getting into the main tub, but you were still sharing your soak with half the neighborhood. It was less about getting sterile and more about boiling the grime off and having a good gossip. And what about that iconic top knot, the Sean Mage? It wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a practical solution to a sweaty problem. The shaved pat was designed to make wearing a heavy, hot, and suffocating helmet slightly more bearable, but maintaining it was a daily chore. It had to be shaved, washed, oiled, and tied just so. A samurai with a messy top knot was seen as a slob, a man who had let himself go. It was the historical equivalent of showing up to a meeting with a stained shirt and untied shoes. The pressure to have a perfect hairdo, even when you're facing financial ruin and a possible battle to the death, is a level of stress I don't think we can fully appreciate. Now let's get to the really fun stuff. Medicine and disease. Life was a biological minefield. A simple cut from a rusty farming tool could lead to a tetanus infection that would kill you in a slow, agonizingly painful way. Food poisoning was a constant threat. And then there were the epidemics. Smallpox, measles, and cholera would sweep through crowded cities like Edo, killing thousands. And what was the cutting-edge medical science available to our stoic samurai? Well, it was a terrifying cocktail of superstition, folk remedies, and a bit of borrowed Chinese medicine. Treatments often involved things like acupuncture with dirty needles, prescribing powdered animal parts, or burning little mounds of moxa herb on the skin in a practice called moxibustion, which basically amounted to giving yourself a series of circular third-degree burns to rebalance your chi. Feeling a bit under the weather? Let's stick you with some unsterilized needles and then set you on fire a little bit. You'll be right as rain, or, dead from a massive infection. It was a real coin toss. And what about mental health? The samurai code of Bushido, which was largely romanticized much later, put an immense pressure on these men to be stoic, emotionless pillars of martial virtue. Showing fear, sadness, or doubt was a sign of weakness. The result was a culture of profound emotional repression. Imagine living in a world of constant low-grade anxiety. Your lord could decide to reassign you at any moment, effectively firing you and leaving your family destitute. A minor social faux pas, a misspoken word to a superior, could lead to your ruin or even a command to commit seppuku, ritual suicide. You had to navigate a labyrinth of social etiquette so complex it would make a British royal dinner party look like a casual barbecue. This wasn't a life of constant epic battles. For most samurai, especially during the long peace of the Edo period, life was defined by crushing boredom. They were warriors with no wars to fight. Their days were filled with tedious bureaucratic tasks, endless ritual, and trying to look busy. They were essentially middle managers in a feudal corporation, armed with deadly weapons and a crippling sense of existential dread. They would practice their swordsmanship, of course, but it was like a concert pianist endlessly practicing scales for a concert that will never happen. What do you do with a lifetime of training for a single defining moment of violence that, in all likelihood, will never come? You get bored, you drink, you write melancholy poetry. You get into petty squabbles with the samurai next door over who has the more aesthetically pleasing arrangement of rocks in their garden. It was a life of incredible contradictions. The samurai were expected to be both refined poets and ruthless killers. They were meant to be frugal Zen masters, yet they were often obsessed with status and appearances. They were a military class in a time of peace, a ruling elite often drowning in debt. It's in these contradictions, in the yawning chasm between the myth and the mundane reality, that the true story of the samurai lies. It's a story not of superheroes, but of deeply flawed, stressed out, and often miserable human beings trying to survive in a brutal and absurd world. What part of this historical nightmare do you find the most surprising? Let me know in the comments below. Was it the poop collectors, the side hustles, or the fact that their entire lives were dictated by the fluctuating price of a single grain? Don't be shy, share your thoughts on this madness. If you thought their domestic lives were a bit of a damp squib, then prepare yourselves, because we're about to dive into the truly glamorous world of samurai leisure, diet, and general existential dread. Last time, we peeled back the rice paper screens to reveal the chronically bored, often broke, and perpetually constipated reality of your average warrior. We saw them gluing umbrellas to make ends meet, shivering in their paper houses, and meticulously oiling their top knots while dreaming of a war that would never come. But what did they do when they weren't meticulously counting their rice koku or trying not to accidentally decapitate a commoner for perceived disrespect? Well, they ate. And oh, what a culinary journey that was. If you thought modern Japanese cuisine was all delicate sushi, perfectly marbled wagyu, and artfully arranged bento boxes, prepare for a crushing disappointment, because you're about to be plunged into the beige and bland reality of the samurai diet. Forget flavor explosions, think sustenance, possibly with a side of dysentery. The absolute cornerstone, of course, was rice. White rice, brown rice, glutinous rice, mountains of it, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, usually accompanied by some pickled vegetables, tsukemono, that were less about culinary artistry and more about preventing scurvy and making the rice slightly more palatable. Sometimes, if they were truly lucky, a bit of miso soup. Miso soup, the height of gastronomic adventure. Meat was a luxury, often forbidden or considered impure due to Buddhist influence, especially beef and pork. Fish was more common, particularly near the coast, but refrigeration was a concept still centuries away from invention. So, what did that mean? Fresh fish was for the wealthy, or the incredibly fast. Most commoners and lower-ranking samurai probably ate a lot of dried, salted, or fermented fish, which, let's be honest, sounds like a delightful recipe for chronic thirst and a perpetually confused palate. And if you think fermented fish sounds bad, imagine it without any of the careful modern processes. Picture it more like fish that has definitely seen better days and is now trying to escape its own smell. Vegetables were seasonal and limited. Root vegetables, wild greens, sometimes a gourd or two. Protein was a constant struggle. Soybeans in various forms, tofu, soy sauce, miso, were vital. But for many, a varied, nutritious diet was a distant dream. Most samurai were probably chronically vitamin deficient, with the occasional bout of food poisoning to spice things up. Imagine being a warrior, expected to be a pinnacle of physical prowess, but you're constantly fighting off the urge to nap due to low energy and an almost certainly anemic blood count. It's not exactly the stuff of legends, is it? More like the stuff of a very long, very uncomfortable afternoon nap. So if their bellies were filled with blandness, what filled their minds? Boredom, mostly. Especially during the long peace of the Edo period, samurai were warriors without wars. Their lives were a bizarre blend of rigid protocol and endless waiting. And how did they cope with this profound sense of purposelessness? Well, just like anyone else, they found ways to entertain themselves, some more honorable than others. Let's talk about the pleasure quarters. The red light districts of cities like Edo and Kyoto were booming. And yes, samurai were among the most frequent patrons. Despite the strict moral codes of Bushido, which encouraged frugality and abstinence, human nature, and a fat dose of male privilege often won out. The geisha and courtesans of the Yoshiwara district were not just prostitutes, they were highly skilled entertainers, trained in music, dance, poetry, and conversation. They offered an escape from the stifling formality and pressure of samurai life. But this wasn't cheap. Blowing your rice allowance on an evening with a top-tier oiran was a surefire way to plunge deeper into debt, much to the chagrin of your long-suffering wife, who was probably back home patching up your only decent kimono. It was a vicious cycle. Debt leads to stress. Stress leads to seeking escape. Escape leads to more debt. A timeless classic, really. Beyond the courtesans, there was gambling, a universal vice that transcended social class. Dice games, card games, betting on dogfights or cockfights. If there was a way to make a quick buck, or lose it all, someone was doing it. Many samurai, desperate for a way out of debt or just for some excitement, would fall prey to gambling addiction. Imagine a samurai, a supposedly honorable guardian of society, secretly sneaking off to a dingy back alley, risking his family's last few coins on a roll of the dice. It's hardly the image of the stoic warrior meditating under a waterfall, is it? More like a desperate man making terrible life choices in a smoke-filled room. For the more cultured samurai, there were the arts. No and kabuki theater were popular. No, with its slow, ritualistic movements and masked performers, was for the highbrow, often associated with the samurai class. Kabuki, on the other hand, was more vibrant, dramatic, and accessible to a wider audience, but still very popular among samurai who could afford it. These weren't cheap nights out either, but they offered a chance to see epic stories, escape into fantasy, and perhaps even impress a lady with your discerning taste in drama. Then there were the refined arts, poetry, especially haiku, calligraphy, the tea ceremony, flower arranging, ikebana. These weren't just hobbies, they were essential parts of being a cultured samurai. You had to master them, or at least pretend to. Imagine being a battle-hardened warrior, trained from childhood to wield a sword, now agonizing over the precise placement of a single camellia in a vase or debating the nuanced meaning of a 3-line poem about a frog jumping into a pond. It was a constant performance of refinement, a desperate attempt to appear cultivated even if your inner world was a maelstrom of financial woes and unfulfilled martial ambition. The pressure to be both a deadly weapon and a sensitive artist must have been absolutely maddening. Let's talk about appearances. We already discussed the shanmoj, but samurai fashion was a whole other beast. The kimono was the primary garment, often layered, especially in colder weather. The fabric, color, and pattern all spoke volumes about a samurai's rank, wealth, and even their political affiliation. And these weren't your comfortable loungewear kimonos. These were often stiff, formal, and restrictive, especially when worn in multiple layers. Imagine trying to run, or God forbid fight, while wearing several expensive, heavy silk robes that restrict your movement and constantly threaten to trip you. It's like trying to battle a ninja in a duvet cover. And then, the swords. Oh, the swords. The katana and the wakizashi, the daisho. These weren't just weapons, they were the very soul of the samurai. They were passed down through generations, meticulously cared for and treated with almost religious reverence. But they were also a constant burden. They were expensive to acquire, maintain, and polish. A good sword polisher was a craftsman of the highest order, and his services didn't come cheap. Imagine carrying around 2 immensely valuable, incredibly sharp objects every single day, even when you're just popping down to the market to haggle over the price of dried fish. You couldn't just lean them against a wall. They had to be placed just so, angled precisely, always within reach. It was a constant reminder of your status, your duties, and your potential to accidentally dismember someone by simply turning too quickly in a crowded alley. And that brings us to the delightful topic of social life and etiquette. If you thought modern office politics were tricky, you haven't seen anything until you've navigated the feudal Japanese social hierarchy. Every interaction was governed by an unbelievably complex web of rules, gestures, and verbal cues. The depth of your bow, the words you chose, the way you held your body, everything conveyed your status relative to the person you were interacting with. A single misstep, a perceived insult, could have catastrophic consequences. We're talking about forced apology, public humiliation, or even, for the truly unlucky, a swift end to your lineage via seppuku. The concept of honor and face was paramount. Samurai lived under a magnifying glass, constantly scrutinized by their peers and superiors. Any perceived slight to your honor, or that of your lord, could not go unpunished. This led to a pervasive sense of paranoia and hyper-awareness. Imagine living every moment of your life under the threat of social annihilation, constantly performing, constantly vigilant for any sign of disrespect, real or imagined. It was a recipe for chronic stress and a profound inability to relax. This intense pressure was further exacerbated by the infamous Kiri suit gomen, the right to cut down a commoner who had insulted a samurai. While not as rampant as popular culture might suggest, because let's face it, cleaning up a murder scene and dealing with the aftermath was a hassle, the very existence of this right created an incredibly tense power dynamic. A samurai, perhaps having a bad day, suffering from chronic indigestion, and still reeling from last night's gambling losses, might perceive an ordinary farmer bumping into him as an unforgivable offense. One wrong move, one clumsy step, and a commoner could find themselves facing the sharp end of a katana, simply because they lacked the social standing to defend themselves. It was a chilling testament to the brutal realities of power in feudal Japan. So, while the Edo period was a time of relative peace, it was by no means a time of tranquility for the samurai. Their peace was one of enforced idleness, punctuated by bouts of extreme social pressure, financial anxiety, and the ever-present threat of a brutal summary death, either self-inflicted for honor or delivered by a quick-tempered colleague. It was a gilded cage, a polite society built on a foundation of terror, and yet they persevered. They drank, they gambled, they wrote poetry, they glued umbrellas, and they meticulously polished their swords for battles that would never come. What a life, right? A delicious stew of anxiety, boredom, and the lingering threat of a very sharp sword. Next, we're going to delve even deeper into the internal world of these fascinatingly miserable individuals, exploring their family lives, their deeply complex relationship with women, and the truly bizarre customs surrounding death in the afterlife. Prepare yourselves because it only gets more wonderfully absurd from here. But before we venture further into this delightful historical nightmare, I want to hear from you. Which aspect of samurai leisure and social life do you find the most shockingly mundane or surprisingly brutal? Was it the bland diet, the gambling debts, the suffocating etiquette, or the absolute terrifying power of the Kirisute Gomen? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Welcome back to the historical horror show, you brave, beautiful masochists. In our last two installments, we've established that the life of a samurai was less about epic duels at sunset and more about financial ruin, crippling boredom, and a diet that could make a rock seem flavorful. We've seen them shivering in their paper houses, stressing about their hairdos, and navigating a social labyrinth so complex it would give an MI6 agent a nervous breakdown. But we've only been scratching the surface of the domestic misery. Today, we're going past the front door, beyond the public face of the stoic warrior, and into the heart of the samurai home. We're talking about love, marriage, family, and of course, the grand bloody finale, death. If you thought their professional lives were a nightmare, buckle up, because at home, there was no escape. Let's start with the cornerstone of any samurai household, marriage. And if you're picturing a tender romance, two souls finding solace in each other's arms amidst a harsh world, then you've been watching far too many animes. Stop it. Get some help. For a samurai, marriage was about as romantic as a corporate merger. It was a strategic alliance, a cold, hard transaction designed to secure lineage, forge political bonds, and hopefully acquire a bit of wealth or land. The bride wasn't a partner, she was an asset. Her primary functions were, in this very specific order, to produce a male heir, to manage the household with flawless efficiency, and to be as quiet and unobtrusive as humanly possible. The life of a samurai wife was a masterclass in silent suffering. Her entire existence was governed by a Confucian rulebook of submission, most famously laid out in a text called the Onna Daigaku, or the Great Learning for Women. This delightful little handbook essentially instructed a woman that her only purpose was to obey. First, she must obey her father. Then, upon marriage, she must obey her husband and even more terrifyingly, his parents. And finally, if her husband died, she had to obey her own son. It was a lifelong sentence of servitude, passed from one man to the next. The book helpfully explains that a woman's character is defined by gentle obedience, chastity, mercy, and quietness. It also warns against traits like discontent, slander, and jealousy, which is a bit rich considering her husband was often legally entitled to have concubines. Imagine being told your key performance indicators are being quiet and not getting upset that your husband has a state-sanctioned side piece living under the same roof. It's the kind of HR nightmare that would launch 1,000 lawsuits today. The wife was the CEO of the household, but a CEO with no salary, no stock options, and no power to question the board of directors, which consisted of her husband and his terrifying mother. She managed the finances, or lack thereof, oversaw the servants, and raised the children, all while navigating the treacherous politics of the extended family. She was expected to be perfect, serene, and eternally gracious, even as the rice barrels emptied and the debt collectors knocked at the door. Her world was the home. She was, in essence, a prisoner in a very polite, very well-organized jail. And what about the children? Surely they were a source of joy, a ray of sunshine in this gloomy existence? Not exactly. Children, particularly sons, were less about love and more about legacy. A son was the continuation of the family line, the next link in the chain of honor and duty. His upbringing was, from the moment he could walk, a brutal training regimen designed to beat the weakness out of him. He was taught to endure pain, hunger, and cold without complaint. Stories abound of young samurai boys being forced to walk barefoot in the snow, attend executions to harden them, or spend nights alone in graveyards to conquer their fear. It wasn't about building character, it was about manufacturing a specific type of human machine, one who could kill and die without emotion. Daughters, on the other hand, were future bargaining chips. They were trained not in martial arts, but in the domestic arts and etiquette, groomed from birth to be the perfect submissive bride for another strategic alliance. Their value was in their purity, their obedience, and their ability to be married off to a suitable family to further their own family's interests. It was a system that treated its children as either future soldiers or future property, both destined for a life of rigid, unforgiving duty. This brings us to the great contradiction in the samurai's relationship with women. Inside the home, the woman, the wife, was a powerless, respected servant. But outside the home, in the glittering, floating world of the pleasure quarters, women held a very different kind of power. The courtesans, the geisha, the entertainers of districts like Yoshiwara and Edo were often more educated, more witty, and more culturally savvy than the samurai who paid for their company. A samurai's wife was expected to be demure and ignorant of worldly affairs. A top-tier courtesan, on the other hand, was expected to be able to discuss politics, compose poetry, play music, and hold a sparkling, intelligent conversation. It's a staggering irony. To find intellectual companionship, a samurai had to leave his honorable home and enter a world officially deemed shameful and immoral. He lived in a world where the woman he married was a domestic manager, but the woman he paid for was his intellectual peer. This bizarre dichotomy speaks volumes about the suffocating and deeply hypocritical nature of samurai society. Now, it would be wrong to say all women were powerless. There are legendary tales of the Onabu geisha, female warriors who took up the naginata or dagger to defend their homes and families. Figures like Tomo Gozen are iconic, but these were the exceptions that proved the rule. For every one female warrior celebrated in legend, there were tens of thousands of women living lives of quiet domestic desperation, their stories lost to a history written by and for men. So, you've survived the loveless marriage, the brutal child rearing, the crushing debt, and the existential boredom. You've navigated the social minefield and managed not to get yourself killed for bowing incorrectly. What's your reward? A peaceful retirement? A quiet life of reflection and gardening? Of course not. Your reward is death. And for the samurai, dying was the most important performance of their entire lives. Let's talk about seppuku. The word itself, meaning stomach cutting, is brutally direct. The romanticized version is a warrior, defeated but honorable, calmly kneeling, composing a final poem, and then making a swift, clean cut to release his spirit. The reality was a gut-wrenching, agonizing, and profoundly messy affair. The ritual was precise. The samurai would dress in white, the color of death, and kneel on a tatami mat. He would be presented with a short blade, the tanto, often wrapped in white cloth so he wouldn't cut his hands. He would then plunge this blade into his own abdomen, making a specific slice from left to right. The idea was that the stomach, the hara, was the seat of the soul, and by slicing it open, he was showing his spirit to be pure and untainted by shame. But let's be blunt. Disemboweling yourself is not a quick or easy way to die. It's an agonizing process that could take hours. This is where the kaishakunin, or second, came in. This was usually a trusted friend or skilled swordsman who stood behind the kneeling samurai. His job, after the initial cut was made, was to perform a dakikubi, a swift beheading to end the suffering. But even this could go wrong. A nervous or unskilled kaishakunin might botch the cut, resulting in a horrifying spectacle of hacking and sawing. The entire honorable ritual could descend into a bloody, undignified mess in a split second. And why would someone do this? Sometimes it was to avoid capture by an enemy, but more often, especially in the peaceful Edo period, it was a punishment. Seppuku was an ordered execution, a way for the ruling class to force a disgraced samurai to kill himself to restore the honor of his family and lord. It wasn't a choice. It was a command. Refuse, and you would be executed as a common criminal, bringing eternal shame upon your entire family. It was the ultimate act of social control, disguised as an act of personal honor. If you think forced ritual suicide is bizarre, allow me to introduce you to yunshi, the act of following the lord in death. That's right. For a time, it was a custom for a lord's most loyal retainers to commit suicide upon his death, to serve him in the afterlife. It was the ultimate and most insane loyalty pledge. Imagine your boss dies of old age, and the company HR department shows up at your desk not with a grief counselor, but with a knife and a note saying, "Your service is required in the next department." This practice became so widespread and wasteful, wiping out generations of experienced retainers, that the shogunate eventually had to ban it. The fact that it needed to be banned at all tells you everything you need to know about the psychological pressures these men were under. Their entire lives were a performance, played out on a stage of rigid expectation. They were expected to be fierce but cultured, frugal but dignified, loyal but intelligent, and stoic to the point of self-destruction. From the moment they were born to the moment they sliced open their own stomach, they were trapped in a cage of honor, a cage they themselves helped to build. Their secret lives, behind the closed doors of their homes and the closed doors of their own repressed minds, were a constant struggle against the impossible ideal of the perfect warrior. Next time, in our final installment, we will explore the final crumbling of this world. We'll look at the samurai in a time of peace, their descent into bureaucracy, their hilarious and often pathetic attempts to adapt to a world that no longer needed them, and the final bloody showdown that brought their era to a crashing, dramatic end. But before we get there, what do you think is the most brutal aspect of samurai private life? The soul-crushing marriage contract, the abusive child rearing, or the gruesome, often mandatory ritual of seppuku? Let me know your thoughts on this domestic nightmare in the comments below. Alright, you survivors. You've waited with me through the muck of samurai daily life. You've endured their bland diet. You've cringed at their soul-crushing family dynamics, and you've stared into the abyss of their obsession with honor and ritual suicide. You have seen the man behind the terrifying mask, and you've realized he's mostly just worried about his mortgage. But every story, especially one as steeped in glorious misery as this, must have an end. And the end of the samurai is perhaps the most ironic, brutal, and frankly hilarious chapter of them all. This is the story of what happens when a class of professional killers is rendered obsolete. This is the story of the great redundancy. Welcome to the final pathetic and bloody act in the absurd tragedy of the samurai. For 2.5 centuries, under the iron fist of the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan was at peace. A forced, locked down, suffocating peace. And for the samurai, this was a disaster, a slow-motion catastrophe. Their entire reason for being was violence. They were the sharpened edge of the feudal state. But in a state with no major wars to fight, what does a sword do? It rusts, or, in the case of the samurai, it becomes a bureaucrat. The once feared warrior, the man who could cleave a man in two, was now a pen pusher. His battlefield was a desk. His enemies were poorly filled out tax forms. His war cries were replaced by the quiet scratching of a brush on paper. Imagine the existential horror. You spend your youth training to face death, mastering the art of the kill, only to spend your adulthood shuffling papers in a provincial castle, arguing about rice stipends and zoning regulations for a new pickle merchant. The legendary katana, the soul of the samurai, became little more than a cumbersome fashion accessory, a status symbol to clank against the doorframe on your way into the office. It was the historical equivalent of a fighter pilot being grounded and forced to work in air traffic control for the rest of his life. The skills were still there, simmering under the surface, but the purpose was gone, replaced by a profound, soul-crushing boredom. This professional castration led to some truly bizarre social developments. With no actual fighting to do, the samurai class doubled down on the performance of being a warrior. Bushido, the so-called way of the warrior, was largely codified and romanticized during this long peace. It was a way of creating an identity when the original one had been hollowed out. It's like a bunch of laid-off factory workers getting together to write epic poems about how noble it is to operate a riveting machine. The rules of etiquette became ever more complex and absurd. The angle of a bow, the proper way to present a gift, the correct seating arrangement at a tea ceremony. These became matters of life and death, because there were no actual matters of life and death to worry about anymore. And the economic decay, which we've touched upon, accelerated into a full-on nosedive. The samurai were paid in rice and a fixed stipend, but the merchants, officially the lowest rung on the social ladder, were dealing in a thriving cash economy. As the centuries of peace wore on, the merchants grew fabulously wealthy while the samurai, with their fixed incomes and lavish social obligations, grew poorer and poorer. The ruling class was drowning in debt to the very people they were supposed to despise. There are endless pathetic accounts of samurai having to take on humiliating side jobs. They made toothpicks, they bred goldfish, they repaired umbrellas. Some even sold their precious swords or, in the ultimate act of desperation, arranged for their daughters to be married off to wealthy merchants, trading their noble bloodline for a bailout. They had the status, but the merchants had the cash, and in the end, cash was king. The world was changing, leaving the samurai behind, a class of proud, heavily armed paupers. And then, in 1853, the outside world, which Japan had so carefully kept at bay for centuries, came knocking. Or rather, it came steaming. Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy sailed his black ships into Edo Bay. These weren't the elegant wooden vessels the Japanese were used to. These were smoke-belching, coal-powered monsters bristling with cannons that could level a city from miles away. The arrival of the black ships was a national trauma. It was a brutal, technological sucker punch. The samurai, with their swords and spears and their centuries of carefully cultivated martial pride, were suddenly, undeniably obsolete. A lifetime of perfecting a sword stroke means absolutely nothing when faced with an exploding Paihan shell. This singular event shattered the fragile peace of Japan and tore the samurai class in two. A ferocious debate erupted. On one side were the traditionalists, the xenophobes who screamed, "Sono joy," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. They wanted to draw their swords and, through sheer force of will and warrior spirit, drive the foreigners back into the sea. On the other side were the pragmatists, who saw the terrifying gap in technology and realized that Japan had to modernize or be colonized. The nation plunged into a decade of political turmoil, assassinations, and small-scale conflicts. The samurai, after 250 years of peace, finally had a cause to fight for. The tragedy was, their main enemy was each other. This conflict culminated in the Boshin War, a brief but bloody civil war between the forces of the old shogunate and the modernizing factions loyal to the Emperor Meiji. And this is where the final tragic irony of the samurai story plays out. The samurai finally got the war they had been dreaming of for generations. They polished their ancestral blades, donned their beautiful armor, and marched out to prove their worth. And they were slaughtered. The war was won not by the best swordsmen, but by the side that was quickest to adopt Western technology. Samurai loyal to the shogunate, armed with their katanas and their unwavering belief in Bushido, charged headlong into rifle lines and Gatling guns. It was a massacre. It was the brutal, horrifying proof that their time was over. An entire philosophy, an entire way of life, was rendered extinct by the cold, hard math of gunpowder. The victory of the imperial forces in 1868 led to the Meiji Restoration, a period of frantic, top-down modernization. The new government, run by former samurai who had seen the writing on the wall, made a series of calculated, ruthless decisions, and their first order of business was to dismantle the very class they had come from. In a few short years, the samurai were stripped of their privileges one by one. Their rice stipends were converted into government bonds, which quickly lost their value. In 1876, the final unthinkable blow was struck. An edict was passed forbidding the wearing of swords in public. The Haitore Edict, the soul of the samurai, the very symbol of their identity, was now illegal to carry. Imagine the scene. A man who, for his entire life, was defined by the two swords at his hip is now forced to leave them at home, to walk the streets like a commoner. It was a psychological castration on a national scale. The warrior class was officially, humiliatingly unemployed. Some adapted, they cut their top knots, put on Western suits, and became the politicians, industrialists, and military officers of modern Japan. They used their discipline and education to build a new nation. But for many, perhaps most, the transition was impossible. They were men trained for a world that no longer existed. They were left adrift, impoverished, and stripped of their identity, drowning their sorrows in sake, clinging to memories of a glory that was now gone forever. The last true samurai rebellion, the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, was a final, futile, and deeply romantic act of defiance. Led by the legendary Saigo Takamori, thousands of samurai made one last stand for the old ways, and they were systematically annihilated by the new Imperial Japanese Army, an army of conscripted peasants armed with modern rifles. The age of the samurai ended exactly as it had begun, in blood and fire. So, there it is, the secret life of the samurai, from the myth to the mundane, from the crushing boredom to the bloody machine-gunned end. They weren't gods, they weren't demons, they were a caste of hereditary civil servants trapped by their own mythology, who ultimately became victims of the peace they were sworn to uphold and the modernity they couldn't outrun. We look back and see cool swords and stoic honor, but their story is a far more human and far more tragic tale of debt, disease, domestic misery, and finally, a profound, world-shattering redundancy. It's a cautionary tale that reminds us that clinging too tightly to the past, no matter how glorious, is a surefire way to be destroyed by the future. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the historical nightmare. I hope you've enjoyed this peek behind the paper screens. What do you think was the final nail in the coffin for the samurai class? Was it the 250 years of peace that made them soft, the arrival of the black ships, or the final brutal abolition of their right to carry swords? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this sarcastic dive into the miseries of the past, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more historical horror stories. Stay safe, and be glad you live in an age of plumbing and penicillin.